Okay, it is 7:03, and we have a quorum, so I am,
Did you wave to the
I
camera?
did. I am calling to order
That was the signal.
the FinCom, the Finance Committee Guidelines Subcommittee is called to order. The first thing I need to do is announce that we have a remote participant, Parashar Patel. Parashar, you want to say something? Well,
You can put us on mute, that's okay.
okay, Parashar is, no, I'm just announcing that you're participating remotely. I'm sorry?
Thank you for accommodating.
Oh, good. You're welcome. Parashar is not being used to make a quorum, but he does have voting privileges. So we're glad that you're able to participate with us tonight. The first order of business is we have to approve some of the minutes we have quite a backlog of minutes. Anita does a great job of getting them done, and then we don't approve them. So the two sets of minutes that we have already seen are the minutes of October 24th, which was when the schools made their first presentation to the Guidelines Subcommittee. You've already seen those. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Anybody opposed? Great, okay, those are approved. The second set would be the minutes of the November 14th meeting, which again was the Guidelines Subcommittee, where the town manager presented his first presentation to the Guidelines Subcommittee, and those were in our packet on November 21. Do I have a motion or any changes?
Yeah, I have a potential edit. On page 3, on the bottom, it's a sentence that says, Ms. Hartman responded that the run rate of the fund can and should be anticipated. Did you say that? Do you remember that? I can't remember.
Say that again, Christine.
It's about legal expenses, so it's when I was asking Stephen Crane about the accrual for legal expenses.
Okay,
And at the end, which is all fine. it
Yes.
says, Mr. Crane noted timing can be challenging. Ms. Hartman responded that the run rate, which is a phrase that I had used, of the fund, and I'm thinking maybe it should be of legal expenses.
of the expenses, yes. It's the
So if
run-
we can just make that of legal expenses.
That's right.
Anita. And then one other one on page 5. At the top, it's a reference to me, so last sentence, Ms. Reynolds distinguished between a want and need in discussing the White Pond and Giroux land projects. What I meant to say was that I desire a more distinction between town wants and needs in discussing the White Pond and the Giroux. So if that's okay with you, I can give that to Anita to change. Does that make sense? It just clarifies what I meant. Is that all right?
I have one question as well, and that is, we don't have a video of this meeting, but the very first paragraph says that Mr. Crane prefaced the presentation with an announcement that the town has experienced a loss of property involving a data breach. I don't know that he was that explicit. Was he that explicit? He was that explicit that it was a loss through a data breach? Okay.
I thought he just had talked about a data breach, but I'm not sure about loss of property.
Exactly. I think he was very circumspect about that, and he just said, go to the website. He wasn't going to tell us anything. So I don't know should we dial it back a little bit? Just take loss of property that the town has experienced a data breach? Is that enough? Is that okay? All right.
That's good.
All right. And then the second sentence in that isn't grammatical. He referred all to the town's website, which he has posted a press release.
Where?
Where he has posted a press release. So,
Good catch.
okay?
I have a different question.
Yep.
On a lot of these minutes, there's a reference to follow-up required or action being taken, and I'm wondering, how are we going about that?
Well, I will let you know that on the November 21 minutes, I did follow up with the school. There are 2 follow-up, and I do have answers for the 2 follow-ups on the November 21st. On the other minutes, I have not been as conscientious.
It appears in these minutes, it appears in other minutes. that
It
we've had
does.
in
We,
past.
the process for this is not very solid, Dee, to be frank. So we probably should come up with some way to keep a tickler file or something that gets these things attended to. It's a good point, and I'll see what I can do to establish some sort of a.
Maybe someone should be designated to, follow up on things like
Chair
that.
of the meeting that's being held, like in this particular case, Mary probably should be.
Yeah.
It should be their responsibility to make sure that these things are taken care of. Yeah, no, it's a good point.
Good question. Okay, so do we have a motion to approve with the amendments proposed?
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. The November 21st minutes are just, I think it's the first time you're seeing them in your packet, so we'll defer approval of those, okay? Okay, next order of business is for us to do the heavy lifting around deciding on a final guideline. I thought it might be helpful if we just grounded ourselves on how we got to the guideline that we established originally, so that then we can move forward with our next steps. So I think we started the guideline process by looking at what we had calculated as the sustainable growth rate, which we calculated at 2.16%. And then we looked at, well, how do we get there? And I think our thinking was that we can't get there right away, we have to get there over time. Last year's guideline was 3.45%. So I think we decided that we would have, I think the word used was glide path, to get from the 3.45 down closer to the sustainable growth rate. And we agreed on a 3.25% guideline overall, right? So that 3.25% was, I don't know how much money that was exactly. It was about 2,860,000. So the first thing we did is we took $279,000 right off the top of that pile of money because of the enrollment shift in the high school. Our thinking was that because this is something that the high school has no control over, and it's a legitimate expense, we gave them $279 right away out of that pot. And then what was left over, we looked at the town, and the town manager in his preliminary conversations with us said that he'd come in at 2.5. So we said, okay, we'll give him 2.5%. And then what was left over, we apportioned between the CPS and the high school based on the relative amounts that they spend. So I think it was for every $1 we gave to the high school, we gave 2 to CPS, because they spend about 40 million and the high school is about 19 or so. So I think that was our thinking. Does that sound right to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So where we are today is people have come in with a guideline, with their preliminary response to our guideline. The town has come in at 2.5%, which is exactly what we asked them. CPS is coming in at 3.57%. We established a 3.15% guideline for CPS, and they're coming in over that by about 150,000. And the high school, we established the guideline of 4.5%. They're coming in at 3.75, which is 150,000 under the guideline. Okay, so our job tonight is to revisit the guidelines that we set, and we can either decide that we're going to maintain them, we can relax them, or we can tighten them. So that's the work that we have in front of us right now.
So one comment I think I'd like to offer that I don't think really got any play at all during our conversation between how are we going to divvy up the funds between, set the town manager aside because he had asked for something and we allocated what we thought he had asked for. So we had some other latitude. One of the things we really didn't consider was that there was some headroom developing in the high school budget because they have a declining debt service component. And we just said, well, this is how much you spent last year, and this is how much the CPS spent last year. Let's kind of slice it proportionally.
Right.
But they actually have a piece of their budget that is, by definition, in decline.
Right.
So
I think it's 97,000 this
it's
year.
nearly 100K.
It's almost 100K,
So they come in 150K below the number we had requested.
Exactly. And you could argue that 75 that is that debt service went down.
More than 75, like
Well,
90.
isn't the 100 for both?
Oh, that's right, you're right.
So
yeah.
75% of that?
Yes, 75% of that.
Right.
So like 75K of that
Correct.
because their debt service has been reduced. But I'm just, wanted to point that out
Yep.
because that never really came up, and I thought about it after that, after we had that discussion and set that guideline. So,
Right. Right. So my thinking is we'll go at this, first we'll talk about the town because it's the easiest one, I hope. Then I think we'd like to talk about the high school, and then finally we'll talk about CPS. Okay, so let's start with the town. The town's coming in at 2.5. I'm going to open this up for discussion. Later, I think I'm going to go around the room so everyone gets a chance. But for this one, I think, I don't know if there's a lot to say, so I'm going to open it up for discussion. What are people's thoughts about the town's, the guideline that we've established for the town? Should we keep it? Should we relax it? Should we tighten it? What should we do?
The general guideline, the operating budget component of it, I was very happy with it because it came in underneath what we suggested. And I thought that the approach was good and it made sense to me, and they were able to move a few things around. It made sense to me, so I didn't have any issues with the town budget on the operating side. On the capital project side, there's the two components that come in that are funded through the general fund and the part that's funded through debt. That's the place where I had questions, and we ended up going back and forth with the town manager a bit at the last meeting with him. And there, I don't know what the right answers are, but what worries me about it is simply taking a percentage. It's a good policy in the sense that you want to have deferred maintenance taken care of in the town. You want to have a place for them to earmark funds to replace roofs and all, and if that's what it was for, that makes perfect sense to me. When it starts now to fund multi-year projects that run in multi-million dollars, that strikes me as something different. And I don't know what the disclosure process or the approval process for that should be,
Right.
but it just strikes me as different. So when I was thinking about what we might do as a committee, my thinking was perhaps to recommend to the town manager that they might want to adopt a policy that says if something ends up to be in one of those projects like White Pond or Giroux or Warner, if it ends up looking like it's, once you discover, maybe initially you don't know, but once you discover this is really going to be a multi-year program, because we want to, maybe that's intentional, you want to lop it in over several years. If it's a multi-year program that's greater than X, my number was $1 million, we could choose any number we want, then perhaps that's something that we think, you need to talk to the town about in whatever process you might like. But that's something that just strikes me as it shouldn't just come in as a, hey, we have 5% a year, because that's getting to be a very big number. So that's one option, or B, we cap it. We say, you know what, that number's not gonna be more than 5 million, we just say, we think
Which
we should
number?
have a cap, as opposed to it being a percentage, it may be $1.
Oh, I see what you're saying, okay.
So those are my reactions.
See, I think the point that you made earlier, which is that replacing roofs, doing preventative maintenance, keeping our inventory of assets, serviceable, is, getting a new fire truck when you need one. This sort of thing makes perfect sense. But where we're finding the use of this, 2 to 5% range of some through debt and some through current spending, is that we're taking pieces of that and we're increasing the asset base. We're doing projects to, improve the town in ways that, are amenable to the town. I don't think the town doesn't want to do these things. We voted at town meeting to acquire Giroux as a park. But it is a really separate function. And if you say, well, we can take care of all of our maintenance within, some amount of that 2 to 5%,
Right,
and now we have headroom,
Right.
it's just like, okay, it's almost like, what can we do with our headroom? Well,
That's what
what's
it
the,
feels like.
what do we cherry pick off of
Right,
a
we're
want list?
spending to the
Yeah,
cap, as
yes, we're
opposed
spending
to-
to the cap. I think
Which-
you've got that just
which,
about right. But we're also spending to the cap in a sort of peanut butter approach. We're putting a few hundred thousand here, 1,000
Yeah,
there,
right.
and we're getting multiple projects done, but it takes each of those additional things a long time.
Right.
So it is I think that's very distinct. There's a very distinct thing when you're spending in that way to increase the amenities of the town.
This is Marshall. I agree with what you're saying. One question I have is, to what extent does the select board review the town manager's proposals? And I'm curious what the select board's philosophy is
I can't speak
Yeah,
for
we
the
can't
select
speak,
board.
it's hard for us to speak for the
We're all
select
just,
board.
we're all just
But we are-
tongue-tied.
We do have a member of the select board, if he'd like to weigh in on that. He wouldn't, okay? Okay,
Hard to say,
That's one to
Parsha.
follow up with, Parsha.
yeah.
Yeah. No, but back,
Because it seems like the town manager report to the select board, you know, well, maybe we can get some input from them as to what their thoughts are. But I generally agree with what you said so far. The line between sort of routine ongoing maintenance versus large sort of maintenance, quote unquote, in terms of the capital expenses is something we should watch and draw line.
so if I'd like to reiterate Christine's earlier point, and since, Dean, you mentioned Giroux, I, for one, did not appreciate when this, you know, obviously a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity came up, that there would be almost a $6 million, 5-year, continuing, ongoing, right, expense. And there are two others. And so I would support the concept of getting this information a lot earlier and having it part of the decision.
Yes.
I don't know if that's completely possible.
I think in the short term, when, at town meeting, when the town manager proposes his municipal capital spend plan, which is just looking at 1 year, I think that would be an opportunity for us to ask questions. Okay, like, well, what exactly, because that's not getting a lot of visibility. It didn't
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah.
So exactly what are in those line items, and how much of that is towards what project, and then ask the question, and right now, what is your estimate of the total cost of that project, even though we're only looking at 1 year?
Correct.
So we have some way to ask these questions, but I think we're talking about something a little bit broader, and I agree that I think getting, talking about maybe a policy change, if we can do that.
I think that's really something that we can be looking at, because it is a FinCom policy that it's 2 to 3% for operating budget, and then it's 5 to 6% in terms of the, within the levy limit debt.
It's not a FinCom policy, it's a financial policy of the town.
A financial policy. So
Yeah.
who then is responsible for making recommendations to examine that or alter it? Is it the finance committee? Is it the select board? Is it the finance department?
Yeah, so I know the existing policies that we have were drafted by the finance department to memorialize really the policies that were being followed, and they were put together for the town manager. I believe they were presented, and we talked about this before, presented to the select board, but the select board was not asked to vote on them.
Yeah.
Did the finance committee vote?
No.
No, so nobody voted.
They're kind of vague.
Right,
Yeah,
and I
this
think,
goes back. Yeah.
as Tony was getting ready to retire, this was one of the things that he had done, just to document
Right.
the policies that
That's a
we
good
had
thing.
been following.
Yeah.
Yes.
But he'd been following them for 20-some years or whatever, and things were different 20 years ago, possibly in terms of the amount of money available. 5 to 6% today is very different than 5 or 6% maybe 20 years ago, and so costs were less too. But I'm just wondering, if we wanted to look at that, what would be our course of action?
So I can follow up with the town manager on that and get back to you.
Great, okay, good. Okay, thank you. I happen to agree that that's an important consideration. It's outside of the actual guidelines. So any other questions about the 2.5% guideline for the town manager? Any other?
I'm very happy with it and don't have much to add.
Great. So can I hear a motion that that's what we would recommend to the FinCom, that we maintain the 2.5% guideline for the town?
Did he come in exactly at the 2.5, or is he under?
He is
It's
now.
under,
He is
but
now.
he's,
No, he is
he-
now.
he's,
The-
he's looking for a little more
Okay,
vitality
okay, I just want to
money.
make sure,
Yeah.
okay, right.
Yeah, the info that Carrie sent us yesterday.
Right,
Okay.
it's
It's-
right at
it's-
the
It's
top.
right at the top.
And if you tighten it up, we're not gonna follow it.
Didn't say that. All right. Okay,
So moved.
second?
Second?
All in favor? Great, good. Let's move on to the high school. As Dean mentioned, right now, they're coming in 150K under. Part Part of that is because of the reduction in the debt service, so I guess net would be they're coming 75K under in real spending savings. We had given them 900,000 and they're coming at about 750,000. Comments, questions?
They also received a rather beneficial restatement of their, other benefits problems. So I think that's helpful, but they're also taking steps to sort of backfill money that they did not that they did not spend for post-employment benefits. So I think maybe that's a wash based on the fact that they're trying to be aggressive and sort of backfill some of the previous money. But
Sorry, Dean, does that then mean that the treatment of OPEB change was responsible for
yes,
that?
they got a restatement of the ARC.
And do you
of all-
recall, it was the ARC and now it's the ADC. Do you recall the difference?
It is not, it's not trivial. Let's just put it that way.
So-
Maybe if you'd like to comment on that, Heather, you can. I don't have it, I don't have it in front of me.
I don't have all the OPEB numbers.
I don't have it in front of me, but it was a substantial change from the previous year.
So in effect, it was an accounting
It was
change.
an accounting change that meant that they did not have to place as much money against their OPEB requirement as they had previously anticipated and were working towards,
That's still at a 2038
2038.
fully funded.
Yeah. So so they got some accounting benefit from that, which there's the little chart.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have last year's
Yes, it
alternative
doesn't
number,
have-
so you don't have anything to compare it against.
Right, never mind.
If you look at the 100,
Their E&D accounts.
They're still spending against D&D. My recollection is that they're spending
300,000.
300,000 against D&D.
right.
So that's their goal is to dial that back even further, but they felt as though that was a much more manageable number than where they were, which is in the 600 range before. And that was very, very poor.
I guess my question would be, going forward, would we continue to, if there's a disparity between the number of students in Carlisle and Concord, would we always be giving Concord, in their budget, that differential? If, because we did this last year, and I'm wondering, with that money, was that offset by being under by 150K and also by their declining debt service payment? Did it kind of wash out that $279,000 or something that we gave them?
I guess I think it's different calculations. I guess what you do when you're allocating between the two towns is you say, what is the budget? Let's not talk about what the elements of the budget are. What is the budget? And then here's how we have to allocate it. Here's how we allocated it last year. And so that just gets you an absolute number of differential that is in effect caused, like you can say, if the ratios were the same as last year, then it would be it would be this. But since it's not, it's this other thing, now you can identify the actual number that is caused by the shift in populations. So that, I think, is a distinct problem from how the budget moves through its internal factors, which is, debt service declining, OPEB being restated, all kinds of other factors. I think it's distinct.
So then I'll shorten it and say, are we setting a precedent by giving them that money this year, for future years?
I think
Or are we just looking at it every year?
I think-
we look at it?
I hope I'm here next year, but I would expect that next year we would look at it again. Yeah.
So just so I'm clear, so is your question, is the underlying question, there are 150
No, the underlying question had to do with the differential, the.
The 279.
The 279,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got rid of the other one through Dean's explanation. I'm not touching it anymore.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I'm not not sure I explained it all that brilliantly, but thank you. So where are we
Where are we?
with this?
So Carrie, if they came in at 749, 447, and the guideline was changed from the 4.5 to the 3.75, right?
Yeah.
What would that do to the projected tax rate?
And what do you want me to do with CPS?
Leave that. Leave it at the 3.15.
3.08. So
We're about
pretty
there.
close to there.
A 2.85%
2.85
property
base.
tax increase. Is that correct? Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm not following what you
Yeah, I
just
don't
did.
know what just
What she did was she just squeezed the guideline for CPS back to what their projected budget is. And that meant that
Because they were 150 under?
they're 150 under, so
Okay.
you just squeezed
pulled-
it.
you pulled out the
Went down to
150.
actual.
Yeah,
We just
out of
pulled
the
out the
guideline.
150.
Down to actual.
And
Okay.
now the impact to the property tax went from, I think it was a little over 3. and went down
3.02, 3.03, whatever that
To
is.
2.85. Is that, is the?
Six.
2.86.
Okay,
Yeah, you can see it clear on it.
2.86, there you go.
Okay. But that would be assuming that the CPS did
Well,
not.
we haven't gotten there
Exactly, we
yet.
haven't gotten there. Okay, we got there. Now this
Okay,
is,
gotcha.
we're talking about the high school.
Gotcha, okay.
Well, can we talk about both for a moment?
We can?
I'm just a little curious that one was 150 up, one was 150 down. It's just very interesting that the numbers are so, I'm not saying there's a link, but I'm trying to understand, is there a link that did they explain that last week? Was there something related?
No,
No.
Okay,
No.
just wanted to ask that
no.
question.
The 150 in the high school, remember, is part of that, they got to it by using 300,000 of E and D.
Okay.
So it might be a total coincidence that the numbers are both about 150.
I think they actually described it as such in the school committee meeting, as it is just a coincidence that this is how it happened to have turned out. A happy coincidence, I think, but that's how it was described.
Do you have something you want to say?
Only, I can answer the question if you'd like me
Go
to.
ahead.
It was actually pure coincidence that one is 150 up and the other is 150 down. They were each built individually based purely on what exactly does that district need.
Okay.
And that's where they ended up. So we thought it was odd as well, but it's where they ended
Okay,
up.
good, thank you.
Sure.
Brian, you want to?
No, I guess my only overarching comment is we have to look at these buckets individually and really consider each one, but this seems like a fairly straightforward proposition of
With the high school?
CPS and CCHS, because I think on principle, one of the things we're trying to accomplish is stay on our glide path. And if we stay on that glide path, that essentially what we're doing is we're giving 150 to CPS from CCHS, and we stay on that glide path, right? So,
I would think of it differently. I think of it as, if the high school really can save $150,000 and give quality education, then that's great. And that $150,000 now comes back to the town, and it's used by the town for other things, other municipal services, or goes back to the taxpayer and gets us further down the glide path, if you will. The CPS is an independent from the high school. So, I look at them as independent entities, and if one saves money, that belongs to the town. And then we look at the school, the other side of the schools, again, independently, and what are their needs, and, what is their reason for coming in over? That's the legitimate conversation to have.
Isn't there some shared overhead there from administrative?
But that's allocated.
But that's
Yeah.
all allocated.
It's allocated, so you just, I don't know that there's enough of that.
I mean, you can play around with allocations.
No, they have a very strict process for that, it's a
No,
60.
I didn't mean that in the bad, 'cause I
Yeah.
meant just how you decide your allocations. You could have 10 people look at the same thing and and allocate 10 different ways.
No, I'm going to try to draw a line there, because we've asked the schools, how do you do this? If you have a resource who does things for the district and also does things for CPS, how is that done? And they have a very strict policy mechanism for doing it. It's not like, oh, let's jig it so that we can, reallocate and make it work. It doesn't, it's not how they do it. If they have a person who's in a financial role, they have a policy that's a 50-50 split between the district, because financial services it's not, you don't do more budgeting. You do the same amount, you just budget. So they split that 50-50. And other things are split, I think 60-40, correct me if I'm wrong, Heather.
Yes.
But other things where there's actually a proportionality to the thing are split 60-40. So the only place where they have shown some, budgetary allocating space is in special ed, where as students move, you have to then take resources who were working in one district, and then there might be shared because they're still doing some other things, but they're spending more of their time in the other district because somebody actually graduated into the high school and needs that same service that they were once getting, so that you actually use that same group of people or person to provide that same service. So there's a little bit there, but it's not, I don't think that's enough to play with. They have a very strict policy process with that.
Yeah, I'd like to look at CPS independently and, and have a really good conversation about why do they need more than the guideline, and look at that on its own merits instead of kind of getting it mixed up where the high school is subsidizing.
No, and
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of that. I agree with you.
Okay.
I think at the higher level question
Yep.
for me was, I think we have as I think about our glide path, I
Yep.
think we have a shared responsibility and partnership with the constituency buckets to make sure if we are proposing a glide path, then we have a shared partnership and a responsibility to make sure we try to adhere as closely to the glide path as we can.
Yep.
As well. So from a proportionality standpoint, this looks very convenient. I think we need to look at each individual bucket tonight, to your point. But I think with the understanding that let's try to adhere to sort of the glide path that we set out to do.
Question as well, is it 150, does that represent a one-time cost, or will that be a recurring cost?
Which 150, sorry, the 150?
Shortfall.
The short,
The short,
The shortfall of CPS?
yeah,
one time,
It's one time just related to this guideline.
it's just this year.
just this year.
Yep.
Well, so that 150 is represented by a change in the accounting standard for OPEB
Yes,
and a reduction in interest expense,
yes.
So we
which
see-
are two things that require no action on the part of the administration. They're things that would have happened
I think
anyway.
To be clear, they're actually not reducing their OPEB payments, John, but they do have a more relaxed schedule. So even if they stay on the same payment, they're making more progress against it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, but I think that's
Yes,
the way
it's-
you are. So they're not really taking advantage of this improved OPEB schedule. They're just happy to have it, but they're still they're spending because they have to backfill for years when they were short, and they still feel they need to backfill that. So they're not really taking advantage of that.
So the flip side is the 150 additional going to CPS, is that going to be a one-time, or is that going to be recurring as well?
Sorry, I didn't.
So I think, Wade, there's a different context for this.
Right.
These are their budgets. So if they run with this budget, that's their budget, and next year if they want 3%, the 150 is baked in because that was their budget. So now they're going to use that as the base, and they're going to ask for whatever they think they need over the base. It's unlikely they'll ask for less money.
Right.
But, that's just the way budgeting works. So this will be their budget. It's not a one-time or we'll just give it back. There isn't anything in there that they're.
No, I understand, but it's, I guess, so they're going to carry that forward next year.
Yes.
But there are certain expenses that represent in the budget that are just for that fiscal year as opposed to, I'll add new teachers, I'm gonna have those teachers and they're gonna be there year after year.
I mean, I don't know that we've ever parsed their budget at the level of detail where we look to see what's a one-time expense this year that we can pull out that you'll never have again. Like, what curriculum did you buy that you won't buy again for 5 years? I don't think we've ever gone down
Yeah,
that road.
that's-
Yeah, it's
So
a
that's
net,
actually
it's a
what we're
net
doing.
number of
It's-
100
it's their
100
budget.
line items, you know, so
That's
it's
what
not,
that's what zero-based budget
Yeah.
is, that is what we're doing.
yeah, so there's no,
But I guess moving forward, are we looking, I mean, so the percentages change, right, based on what we allocated, or what we thought about at the beginning of the cycle,
Right,
right? So
Right.
we look at that with a fresh set of eyes next year as well.
yes,
Yes,
yes.
right, exactly.
yes.
We set a guideline, we get information, and now,
Is E&D only at the high school?
I'm sorry?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a completely
just-
self-contained
Right.
budgeting system that has to take into account healthcare and E&D and all
Right,
kinds
so
of.
one of the things that was interesting right this year is that they had 600,000 more in revenue, and I think 200 to 300,000 less in expenses than expected. So if you look at the actuals, I shouldn't say this year, I guess it's fiscal
The one that just
2019, which
ended,
ended
yep.
in June. If I
FY19,
look at
yep.
that, I
Right.
should say it that way. So that they came into 2020 with a big lift. And some of that is they used some of that, as you said, they took 300,000 out of E&D as
That's right,
fund
because they put
operating,
some
because they
in.
had a big number.
That's
And
right.
the reason why they had a big number,
That's right.
most of it, was because of funding, right? So they had interest that was beneficial, and they also had federal and state funding, I think, that was well above what they had budgeted.
Yes.
So they came in
They had
with a-
circuit
with a-
breaker money and
with
they
a
had.
big number
Exactly.
that was to their advantage, right? And so, coming back with 150, 75 of which is off of
Debt
debt,
service, yeah.
isn't, was not a big decline.
Not a
When
big-
you sort
it's
of
not
look
a-
at it
it's not
from
a-
where they
no.
started into, not from a budget perspective, but from actuals
Yes.
of 2019. So I think that and at the state level, so the state has had huge excess, I shouldn't say excess revenues, but tax revenues in excess of what they anticipated in 2018 and in 2019. So I expect that they will get more as well on the education side. So I don't think the schools can do much with that, because we're asking them to do a 2021 budget
Right.
early in
Yeah.
the 2020 year.
Yes.
So all I want to point out is, and I think that Dr. Hunter said this at her presentation, by design, they are conservative in some of their revenue
right.
estimates.
That's right.
So we definitely saw that in the 2019 actuals, and it may be built into 2020. So, we also could say, looks like you might want to take a haircut, because there's a pretty good chance you're going to get more than you think in your 2020 numbers as well. Don't know, but it's just something to put out there, because those numbers were big.
So I'm hearing you say that you think they can live within this budget.
I definitely do. I think they can.
Any other comments?
Could you just clarify what the other 75 is off? So 75 was from the debt service, and if the
It's a net of
FinCom,
100
if the FinCom
line
calculated
items.
that in, which we probably will do next year, they would only be under 75.
That's right.
That other 75 is from
A lot of,
where exactly? Like a whole bunch of different.
whole bunch of different things, yes, yes. But as Christine's pointing out, that we don't think they can still live within that budget.
Right, right.
I think so.
Something that I think that kind of swayed me one way or the other was the comment about if we do not adhere to what our guideline is, and the extra $150,000 is in their budget, that is their baseline then for the next year. So that, to me, impacts how we're ever going to be trying to drive down to the 2.16%, where we would like to be. So it would seem to me that sending this message that this is the guideline, this is what we are hoping and what we expect you would try to adhere to, I think is really valuable in the long term.
For CPS, because here.
For CPS,
Yeah,
right,
okay.
right.
We're
I'm
still
just
talking
talking
about the
about
high school.
CPS.
Yeah,
No,
the
we don't
CPS.
have to give more money to the high school. That's all right.
That's all right, I just wanted to make sure.
We don't have
No,
to go the other way.
okay.
No, I'm just talking about CPS, that that, yeah, it might, you know, the $150,000, they'll have to find it some way. They might be getting more money from the state to offset some of their transportation costs for sped, or, you know, something else might happen. But I think if this is what we really want to do, if we really want to look out for the best interests of our town and our taxpayer, then this is the path we're on. And if we can, you know, we can help them out as much as we can, but if we increase their budget for next year, if we increase their baseline for next year, we're not gonna get onto that path. We're not gonna be able to drop it the way we need to.
I appreciate that. I would like to close out our discussion on the high school, okay? And I'm wondering if we have a motion to go with the 3 point, what are they coming in at? 3.75. If I have a motion that we would recommend that the Finance Committee adopt a 3.75% guideline for the high school.
I'll move it, so moved.
I'd second that. That's the same, that's the one that we had.
So
the guy-
they're coming in,
Right.
they're coming in saying, they're coming in at 3.75,
Right.
and I'm saying that we, as a subcommittee, would recommend to the Finance Committee,
Yeah.
which feels silly, but
That's okay, we'll be
But we
here.
have to do it.
We'll be here later tonight.
that we,
That committee will convene.
Okay,
that we would in fact accept that
accept that.
guideline.
And then-
And so we have first, we have a second. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Opposed.
I abstain.
Abstain.
Okay.
Do you want to, do we need to discuss some more, Tom, or no? We're all set, okay. Okay, moving on to CPS, even though we did talk about that a lot. Okay, this is, I think, an important thing. So I'm hoping, I would like to hear from everybody, so I'm going to go around the room and ask people to share their thoughts. Don't feel pressure. If you have nothing to say, you can just pass comments, questions, your thoughts, your feelings. I would appreciate that. Dean, can we start with you?
You can start with me, I'll do my best. So, on the FY '20 budget, we came up with 900, 111, and 1242223. Are those in direct proportionality to the budget, the FY '20 budgets? Are those directly proportional? Do you understand what I mean?
I don't understand.
So the sum of 1, 2, 4, 2, 2, 2, the sum of K through 8 and CCRSD is somewhere around 2.1, 2.14. And that is allocated into the two buckets we did for the original guideline work, okay? Now, I know that we took 279 off the table.
Okay, okay.
We took 279 off the table, and then we're left with
Yes, it is.
some other,
It's
is
proportional.
it
It is.
directly proportional? That's
Okay,
just
because
my
the
question.
900, rough numbers, the 900 goes down to about 6.
Yep.
So that's 2 CPS for every 1 that goes to the high school. 2 to
So-
1.
so
And
2
they
to
spend
1.
40, and the high school spends
Spent
about 20. So, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. So I'm just
Well,
wondering if we could squeeze, if we do it
What do you-
directly, if we just take the ratio of those two numbers, is it gonna come out to the numbers, is what I'm saying.
Okay,
Here,
Try it.
what's this over here?
I don't know, what is that?
This is the calculation over here,
Oh,
which
there it
took
is.
it's over in this corner.
There you go.
Notes on the preliminary
So
guideline.
we did it.
So, no, I don't know, did we do
They're
it?
hard numbers.
Um,
I don't have in that you use.
So, Carrie, can you just do a ratio of
The
what,
30,
of the 39,390 to the 19,996? And just get what those are, just add them up and then say, this is gonna be 32%, and the other one's gonna be 68%.
so you're thinking
So,
that we
I'm
apportioned it.
just wondering if we apportion it
You-
according to the
You-
20
Of
budget.
the total or of each
Okay.
one?
Okay, I think what Dean is saying is that when we started tonight, I said that when we got our bucket of money, right, which was about 2.8 million.
Right.
We took 279 off of it, then we took the 2.5 for the town. The part that was left over, we apportioned appropriately between CPS and the high school. And he's wondering now, did
Is
we
it
really
accurately
do
apportioned
that?
is my question. Can we
Did we
just do
really
it?
do that?
So
So he's
so-
wondering,
So what proportion is 39,390 of that number plus 19,995?
Right.
That percentage applied to
Add those two
the
and take the percentage.
2.142.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what we want.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
That's what we want. I just,
no, you have to take out the 279.
take out the
You have to take
279.
out the
Take the
279.
79 out.
You have
Take
to
it out.
take the 279 out of the 900.
So I'm sorry to be like revisiting this, but if we're down to these dollars, I just want to make sure that,
Say that again, what do you want me to?
okay, so,
Okay.
so,
Add up the 1,242,223 plus 900, 111 minus 279,000. So that's the amount of money we have to apportion,
Got it.
right?
Right.
Right?
Well, it's there. That's what that's what
That is what we did.
but those are hard numbers, she said. She's not can't calculate off that. But anyway, so that's fine.
I think we're saying we did that.
We did that. So all I want to know is the 39,390 plus 19,996, and now do a ratio of what's the 39,390 to the total, and what's the ratio of the 19,996 to the total, and
No,
are
it should
those
just be to the
actually
sum
what
of-
these
It should
numbers
be-
over here represent?
No, it should be, what are those relative to the sum of those
Yeah,
two?
that's what I mean. Yeah.
Total.
Yeah.
Well, but it's hard to do in this stuff.
Should be 66%. 66. And what was it? It was, it was,
1863.
it was 2.142 minus 279,
Yeah, which is.
right?
Yep.
2.242
Numbers, what's 23?
minus 0.279 equals
So if you,
0.66 equals.
so you get
So-
66 and
So the
Somebody want-
the
should I go
CPS number should be 1.29 million, right? That's the exact ratio, I think,
2.29 million is the CPS.
as opposed to the 1.242,
So we just found them 50,000 bucks.
if I did the math right.
I mean, this is
So
a,
are you proposing that we go back and recalculate?
no, I'm just
You're just using it to find, okay.
I'm using it to find out whether we did it accurately. We had a back of the envelope thing that we did, and and now we're holding them to the 150 grand. I just want to make sure we did it right. Okay.
So this is the appropriation, this is the guideline increment.
Okay. So the appropriation, I'm sorry, this is the appropriation, and this is the,
I don't know what
I
that
don't
those
is.
two words mean. I don't really
What do you
know.
mean?
I
What is the
thought, I
40?
thought you asked me to do the ratio of this.
Pull out the town.
Karen, can you just click in there and show everybody what 44.71, what calculation is up at top? So, a little small, there it goes.
E17 over E19.
Is that what you're looking for?
No,
We're 17.
no, we're looking for
No.
The sum of
E17 over,
39
the sum of
and
E17 and
So-
E18.
E18, the sum of E17 and E18, and then what is the ratio of E17 to that sum, and what is the ratio of E18 to that sum? And
And
It's 2 to
CPS is
1.
gonna be a little
So I'm
short.
telling you,
it's roughly 2 to
So-
1, but
Roughly, but
okay.
it's a little short for CPS.
It is a little short from CPS.
It is, yeah, okay.
It is like 66.1, and it should be 66.6.
Oh, well, that's, if you're not finding $50,000,
How much
it's not worth the
How
time.
much did you find?
I don't know what that is.
so it was 1.29 instead of, it was $50,000.
It was $50,000, so we found like 50,000 for the district somehow by just doing the
Okay,
ratios carefully.
let's change this guideline 50,000, call it
Okay.
a night. That's good to me. Just joking.
Anyway, that was my comment. Can we just look at that to make sure that, if that's the budget that's, feels the pressure, and we wanted to do this allocation, that we did it in an accurate manner, and so that,
Okay,
that's all, that was my
Okay.
request. is
Thank
that
you.
we do that.
do you have anything else that
No,
you?
that's all, that's it for
Okay,
me
so-
for now.
so
I
you're
might have
saying-
something later.
You're saying if we had done it more accurately, the number would have been 50K higher?
it
Yeah, that-
appears as though it might have been.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
John
okay,
seemed to
good,
think,
thank
you know, so.
Okay,
there you go.
Brian, do you have anything that you want to?
So you're saying the shortfall, it's, instead of 150, it's 100 is what
Like
you're saying?
100, but it's
Closer
still,
than we
it's
thought.
still 100,
Yeah,
which is,
okay.
you know,
Right.
can we
Do you have
find that in the
anything you wanna
seat cushions? I don't know.
Do you have anything you want to say about that?
Not right now, no. I will reserve comment for just a minute. but
Okay.
I may see something
Okay.
later.
Brian, do you have anything you want to say? No, okay. Comments, questions?
I just wonder how the variability in the sped numbers, I mean, a change in that can just blow everything, right? Do we have the latest figure for that?
I have a hard time understanding sped.
Yeah, me too.
I really do. I think that it came in lower, but it was really because they got back less than they expected, and I have a hard time figuring it out, actually. I do know that, bottom line, this is how I understood it. Sped was higher over year, but then offsetting that were some savings, in my mind, is how offsetting that were some savings in early retirements. So yes, sped is always, you're right.
Yeah.
And that was a little higher, and that's how I thought about it. But yeah, I don't,
The main piece around SPED, Dick, is that their accounting system now really only breaks out your out-of-district SPED. So when they talk about SPED, it has to do with SPED transportation and out-of-district placements. And those can be quite variable. But they're trying to have fewer of those, and the trajectory of that is good because they're building regular education
That's true. That is
systems that support their SPED students. And so that, but that isn't easily broken out when you look at the budgeting because they're instructors and they're in the instructional, budget lines. So they aren't as easily found, but that's by design.
and the other thing about sped is you never really know now what you're gonna need
We're gonna
when,
have a student move in.
exactly.
Yeah.
Who needs
Yeah.
severe?
Exactly. So this is a big unknown. It's the big variable.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanna say?
No,
Comments?
but I do agree with John that if we're gonna make the allocation fair, then we probably do need to add 50,000.
John?
So,
Eric, could we ask if people speak up just a little bit?
Sure. Can you speak up?
sure.
You got the good speaker.
Now that you're done.
Excuse me. Yeah, so the SPED thing is frustrating because they're doing all the right things, and yet somehow it's not falling to the bottom line. And so what we need to see is going forward, when do those two lines meet, in my opinion, right? They're doing all the right things, making the investment, it's better for the kids, et cetera,
Yep.
but, sort of,
Never meet, though.
sorry?
They may never meet,
Well, but they better meet. They should meet. I mean,
can approach me, but
well, I'm not going to take no for an answer. I think the intention is that the attempt is that they meet somewhere. So I'm in favor of, I think the reason we establish a guideline is because we've thought about it and we've decided, that's a adequate number and I'd like to see it adhered to. I'd like for someone to explain to me precisely what the benefits of zero-based budgeting is. Because I'm sure they're spending better, but it doesn't appear as though they're spending a lot less. And I don't know how you measure what, the benefit, the impact, to whom the benefit accrues. It doesn't seem to be the taxpayer, as the amounts requested seem to be comparable.
Well, we don't know what spending would have been if they hadn't done so. That's,
Yes, so higher, I guess, is the answer, right?
that's,
Yeah. And so, yeah, and particularly I reread the notes, for the minutes from the last meeting, and level service was mentioned a number of times, and yet, there are a lot of things like 2 new buses and 3 new assistant principals, and so the buzz line is level service, but I guess I don't know the definition of level service. There were a lot of decisions made that would seem to run counter to that. So I found a little disappointing, to be honest. So I'd be in favor of adhering to the guideline number.
with the added 50?
Yeah.
Parashar, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I guess, I would like folks to hear the number, but I'm also interested in what the trade-off is. And so I don't know if it's possible for them to come back and say, look, if we had a year guideline, here are a list of additional items that John just mentioned or other aspects that we would have to scale back or cut so that we can sort clearly see where the priorities are and make a call as to whether or not that will be raised because those are key in the town thinking they're higher priorities or the town and we decide, you know what, they're not and for those for next year's budget. So I wish that would fall below the line helpful.
Anybody have any response to that? I think Parashar, that a lot of what's baked into the budget is their expectations about the contract negotiations that they're having with teachers. So a lot of it's a budget, so it's a forecast and there's a lot of unknowns. So I don't know exactly what, they could tell us what they would cut, but I'll bring that up later. Christine?
Yeah, so I was happy, I guess, with the discussion that they talked about what they're doing on SPED. I echo John's comments. As you know, Mary, I tried to figure out what's actually going on with SPED spending. I cannot. So I can't tell you, to me it looks like it's up. And that may be just fine when you take out all the line items. But based on what Dr. Hunter has explained to us, eventually there should be a decline. This is supposed to be a more efficient way to provide the service. I believe it sounds like it is, and so I expect at some point you'll see savings. I don't see savings in this budget, so that's a bit, I don't really understand that as to why we don't see it here, but I don't. And then on other things that they've done, the restructuring of the school, that stuff makes sense to me. The principals, I think that's what, Dr. Hunter is getting it the way she wants to run it. I think they did that efficiently. I think the stuff that they're doing with retirements is good. So I do see some things. They centralized some purchasing. They've done some things, and so I'm encouraged, I guess, by that. So I'm comfortable with the number that we gave them. I'm not, if there's another 50,000, it needs to be, the math is perhaps sharper. That's okay with me too, but I think the number they have is okay. They have 115 contingency in this budget as well. So I'm sure they have room to absorb it. So I'm okay with the guideline.
Just two things. First of all, on zero-based budgeting, the difference I see is that now we have solid answers to our questions. The difference from before zero-based budgeting was there was a lot of questionable expenditures, and we wouldn't get straight answers. Now we get straight answers from the school administration about all the spending. So I think it has been a benefit. I don't know what the spending was before, but I had a lot of questions about it, and they weren't answered. On the $150,000 gap or the $100,000 gap, I've also been on this committee probably longer than anybody else, and I think we've seen that gap easily met, through over the next few months and over the next year. So I think I'm comfortable with, with that sort of gap at this point.
Oops. So I too am very pleased with the response we've gotten, or the performance, I should say, from the school department, the superintendent and the assistant superintendent. The quality of the information and the transparency that we've seen as compared to the prior administration is pretty remarkable. I don't have any concrete proposal to make except to say that I think in order to get us to our glide path, I think perhaps our glide path is even a little higher than it should be in order to get to where the guideline should be. I would be in favor of asking them to hew to the guideline and not give any extra at this point, and ask them to root around to make some more savings.
because I just think we have to send a signal that the guideline is the guideline, and we would like them to hew to it. So,
I have really no comment at this point.
I agree with what Tom just said. I'm impressed with Dr. Hunter and the administration now, but I think we have to keep in mind that what our goal is. Keep working down, and they can tighten that up. That would be beneficial.
I've probably said enough before, but, yeah, there are a couple things that I did want to just address. One is the comments made about SPED. I think that Dr. Hunter has done an excellent job in looking at the long-term plan for SPED and with our students. SPED is an uncontrollable, it has too many uncontrollable variables. When you look at any age, students come in who have needs, and the amount of needs they may have is going to vary from student to student. So that's just my take on SPED. I just think that they're doing an excellent job with that. I echo Tom's remarks also about adhering, and other people's remarks about adhering to the current guideline that we have. And my point there is that I think we're sending a clear message to the schools that contract negotiations are coming up, and we really are in need of adjusting how we look at spending money. And so I would like us to continue with our current guideline, unadjusted for the 50,000.
Agree with everything that everybody else has said. I had one question of how we would deal with things. On the debt service, hopefully we look at that next year and take that into account, that they would have been.
That's only for CCRs. That doesn't affect.
But my question going to be, right, is they have that there, if we realize that would have dropped, and put another 750 according to our glide path in the bucket somewhere to be used, right? Because we set a budget number of this. I don't know if we would have given it to CPS at that point, but I'm just, so that we are aware of next year when we're doing it, to take that into account and not necessarily use that as a number that we can, adjust our glide path with. But everything else, I agree with what people have said there.
Well, I guess I'll make my comments. I'm going to repeat what everybody said. I think the relationship that we have with the schools is so much more from when I came onto the finance committee. It's remarkable. It's transparent. I think it's cooperative. I think they're doing the right things. And Jerry's even looking at how they can save money on copying and printing. I mean, it's remarkable. On the other hand, though, I do see that they're coming into some contract negotiations and salaries are the biggest driver in their budget. And this is a way for us to send a message that we can no longer sustain 4 or 5% salary increases year over year. That is just not, we're never going to get to a sustainable growth rate if we continue to allow that. And this is a way to kind of temper that when they go into those negotiations. So that's my thinking, that I would like to stay within, I would have them stay within the guideline, and I'm kind of undecided about the 50K. So maybe we should talk more about the 50,000, How do people feel about adjusting this? Because Dean has pointed out that we have a more accurate way of calculating it, and in fact, the number should have been 50K higher. How do people, I'm opening it up, what do you think?
So the guideline process isn't perfect. I think we all know that. And this would be, I think, a logical adjustment to make based on new information, would be my feeling. So, yeah.
I have this feeling that we're comparing apples and oranges when we're looking at the numbers from the previous year and calculating then a percentage. When there was no adjustment made in that prior year for what percent was going to Concord to pay and what percent was going to Carlisle to pay. So I'm not sure that we're in a position to make a direct comparison.
I don't think we are. I think what we're doing right now is we're just saying that when we took our bucket of money and apportioned it between the three budget entities, we didn't look at last year. We only looked at this year, and we made a miscalculation, a simple math miscalculation, it's arithmetic, of allocating it between these two entities. I think that's what we're trying, that's what's on the table now. Do we want to correct that? That's what we're talking about now.
And we, we've placed some, potential value in the calculation itself, when in fact it was just something that we used as a way of saying, how are we going to divvy this up? And we came up with this descriptive method for figuring out how to apportion, and that's all. It wasn't based on individual drivers from either of the two budgets. It was not based on, any knowledge of how the budgets were constructed. It was more based on, this is the bucket of money that we've decided we think we can, move towards with this glide path idea, and how are we going to divide it? So we came up with a fairly logical approach and then miscalculated how we would do it.
Right.
So then, are you planning to use this same approach in
Well,
subsequent years?
Each
You
year
know,
is a different conversation. It is.
Should it be?
Well, that's why that's why we have limited terms. It is a different conversation.
Oh, we have short memories. But Dee, are you asking about the 279? The way,
Yeah.
that one, that's what you're talking about?
Talking about the
Okay.
279 and then, in subsequent years, what are we talking
We-
about?
well, right. That was a decision we made this year, and we discussed it, and not everybody agreed with that, if you'll remember. And we decided to do that. And next year, we'll probably go through the same process. And I'm assuming that the enrollment shift will still tilt, towards Concord. And we'll probably go through the same
So
conversation
maybe
here.
we're just making a bigger deal out of the 50,000 than we need to be, I guess that's what
Could
I'm
be.
trying to say.
Could somebody check my math so that we, that would be you, Carrie, that I did on my
Only
cell phone?
42,000.
You don't have an
Not with me. It's at home. I left it at home.
So
That's a lot of pressure.
Can I chime in here, because I think what you're talking about is actually an important point, and we do have term limits, so things will get re-underwritten when we're all long and gone. But I think there's a historical reference
Let me show you
point
what I did. Can I
that
do
we
that?
were trying to establish this year with this glide path. And as a reference point, historically, it's a starting point for us to have a conversation going into town meeting and actually basically saying, listen, this is the rationale that the finance committee used to arrive at these particular guidelines. And here is the logic behind that. If we are saying that, well, kind of throwing up our hands and saying, well, we don't know, and we're kind of starting from scratch, and it's kind of a moot point, like 50,000 up, 50,000 down. If we swap it and give them 150 or we would have we're trying to stick to a guideline. And I think it's important that we, if we're going to try to adhere to the guideline and we're going to make the argument to have a reference point, let's embrace that, and not necessarily leave the door open for the idea that, well, we've got term limits, we don't exactly know, 50,000 here doesn't really matter. I think we set ourselves up for a lot of questions that we don't necessarily need to.
But the overarching reference point was our 3.25 value, right?
Yes.
And then we had that to divvy up.
That's right.
Right.
So every year we could tweak that. I'm just giving
Right, I mean-
a counter argument to
We are.
that, right?
We will.
Right. Every year we could tweak where that portion goes. So it doesn't necessarily, this year doesn't necessarily have to match that year, although our glide slope should match of what we're
The
saying this year.
bucket, the glide path for the bucket should be consistent.
Consistent,
What we
right.
do within the bucket,
Right.
Can vary.
that's perfectly fine. I'm just saying, we're trying to establish a reference point, and I think we should embrace that. I think that's what we voted on when we started this conversation earlier this year. My hope is that we can continue along that course of
So
action.
is the reference point the glide path then, in your opinion?
It's 3.25.
Right, it's
3.2,
3.25,
yes.
right, not the
It's the
bucket.
total, not the
Right.
Right.
buckets, right?
Because the allocation could be very different in another year, depending on the
Exactly.
needs.
Yes.
Right, I mean, the committee could come back to us and say, you know, we've got different things that are going on between the two school districts,
Right.
and
That's right.
we've gotta
Right.
help them get to where they need to go. And the other thing I would say, Parshar had a point, I think, I just wanna mention this.
Go ahead.
As we think about trying to fully understand the school committees, it's a slippery slope when we start asking, okay, well, what are you gonna do with that money?
I know. That's a good point.
So the school committee's job is to understand, is to make those decisions, and we have to respect that boundary.
Right.
So we're
Right.
dealing
That's
with.
a good point.
We're dealing with a bucket of cash.
That's right.
We need to deal with that bucket of cash, and we need to trust that the school committee is gonna do their job and deal with the line items.
That's right.
So I just wanna make sure, you know.
That's right. Our job is not to micromanage their budget, is to just establish a guideline.
So Brownie, I didn't mean to imply we need to micromanage their money. What I'm saying is, if they're gonna exceed the guidelines,
Yep,
it would be helpful for them to show, not just us, but town meetings. So what are the items that they really looked at that they still recommend they would want to spend money on that caused them to exceed the guidelines?
yes.
For informational purposes, and then, town meetings, whether to approve the budget, that's what I was after.
Yeah, you're right. And it is up to town meeting, you're right. So is your number right?
So the number that I think we can confirm with Kerry is 53,360. But just for the purpose of this decision, it's an approximation, and we might, rather than, you know, use some specific number, maybe use the phrase that whatever the number in this ballpark turns out to be. That's, or however else you want to deal with that.
So I think it's time for a motion, if you would like to make that, Dean, to change the actual
Yeah, we can vote on that.
dollar amount.
Yeah, I would make a motion to.
Wait. Question.
That a mistake was made,
Kind of.
and
Yeah.
do we correct the mistake?
Yes.
When we divvied up the money that we gave to CPS or that we allocated as a guideline to CPS and to CCRSD, the way in which we calculated it was not particularly accurate. It was sort of back of the envelope. And now we're making it a little more accurate, doing it according to some math.
I have a question. Do we have to go back now and recalculate the amount that we gave to?
You would have to.
You have to go,
You would, but then
Should be the
just
delta.
to stay within
Yeah.
the 3.25,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they would be reduced, but they're
They're
reduced
already
anyway.
reduced.
They
It
were
doesn't
already
matter. They're
reduced.
already- So
We brought
we're
them
good.
down to the-
They've got room within that.
Yeah,
Okay,
they have
good,
room,
fine.
exactly.
Okay, good.
So.
So go ahead, Dean.
I will make a motion to increase the CPS K through 8 guideline from 1,242 to 1,292.
How about 1295 is a nice round number, how about that?
How about
I'll make it
1.3?
1,295. To 1,295.
129558.
Shush. 295. You can just give 000 after that.
No,
That's fine.
I mean,
Well,
we're coming,
dropped
we
it.
did already.
We already
We already
dropped
did that. We already did that.
We did it on our paper, but we didn't do it.
No, well, tonight we're voting a final
we
guideline that
did-
brings them down. So it's.
That's the motion on the table, is that we are
Okay.
increasing their,
We have a motion on the
There-
table.
Second that motion.
Okay, all in favor?
So what the motion is.
The motion is,
One, not, I'm trying to understand what the number was, because I,
It's 53,000.
okay,
it goes from,
okay.
so
From 1242.
it's
So
what?
that brings us to the blue line that you just highlighted.
What does it bring us
Which,
to?
which line does it bring to? Yeah, that one you just, well, that's, yeah.
2.92% increase to taxes. Okay, great. Great.
Now, shouldn't you reduce the CCRSD?
Do the other one?
No, Sherry
Fill
did
in
that.
the other one?
We haven't
Otherwise,
moved
the
that.
total
We
guideline?
haven't taken a motion. Did we take a motion on the CCRSD's?
CCR, that's done, that's done.
That's done.
That's done.
So the town and CCRSD is done, right? Now we're proposing that the CPS guideline goes up, this is our initial proposal, that it goes up to 1295 to
Right.
make a correction,
An arithmetic
an arithmetic.
correction.
Exactly. Okay, so, and that's the motion, and if we approve that and we make no other changes, we might, but if we don't make any more changes, the total would be 2.8 million, and the impact to property tax would be a 2.92% increase. That's the blue row.
The blue row, yep.
Right.
62114.
Tax increase in
2.92.
3 to 2.92.
Right, and it leaves the levy at 3.8.
Oh, good, good, thank you for looking at that, that's an important thing, too. The levy limit is, stays at, what does the levy, 4.02?
Percent, right, 3.
Thank you, thank you.
Where's the line where we're consuming levy?
It's on the
It's
left-hand
way-
side.
it's
the
column
same-
A.
Highlighted
It's
it.
column,
She has a
it's
little-
column A, 4.02.
When you use levy capacity consumed, is a negative number we're adding to the levy capacity?
It is because when you voted the preliminary guideline, we did not have, we had what we submitted to the state for new growth,
Yep,
but we didn't have the certification back.
yep.
And we also had not backed out the allowance we had for the snow and ice deficit, so we didn't bring a snow and ice deficit forward, but we had not taken that out yet. So the combination of those.
So we're actually adding to the levy capacity with this.
Right.
Wow. good
Now,
call.
I would just caution, this is based on what you're doing. We still are gonna get our health insurance renewal, and we'll have to make sure the number we have is good. So that, I mean, that
Fixed
still
cost.
could change.
All the costs outside of the guideline.
When does that come in?
Well, that, we probably won't have it till the end of January. We have a meeting next month, and I think we'll have next week, we'll have an idea of what they're looking at.
But the unused levy is a good number.
The unused levy, based on the set of assumptions we have at this point in time.
Right, she's
If
saying
fixed
that
costs
some
go
things could
up.
come in, like the healthcare piece could come in.
Fixed
and-
costs go up, she's telling you it might come down a bit. Yeah.
All right, so the
Okay.
motion on the table is for the 1.295 million guideline for CPS.
We had a second.
We have a second for that
And we
motion?
had a question, we had any other discussion? All in favor? Anybody opposed? One. Parashar, I can't count your vote, I'm sorry. Are you in favor, opposed, or are you abstaining?
I'm in favor.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
But you said you can't count my vote, you can't.
You
We can.
We can count it, but we can't see you.
You're raising your hand, but I can't tell.
We couldn't tell if you had your hand raised.
And I'm sorry, I should have asked you earlier when we had,
Raise your hand now.
Isn't there some rule that you can't, I'm happy to count his vote, but isn't there some rule you can't count votes?
no, you can.
You
One.
can't count towards the
Quorum.
quorum.
Can't count towards a quorum, and
But he
one
can vote.
member, one member can participate remotely, and their vote counts.
Oh.
One member.
Well, a quorum just means you can have a meeting. I mean, that's all it really means. In other words, if we have 7 people assembled and he's the 8th, we can't have a meeting. But if he's here, when we have a quorum
Oh,
assembled.
when the,
he-
but
when-
I see, I got you, understand.
Do we need to discuss now whether we want to make a further adjustment to this, or are we good with what we've done so far? Because what we've done is corrected an arithmetic error, right? But we haven't, we still have a gap of $100,000 between us and what the school wants. So do we need to talk about that, or do we feel that this is where we want to be?
I thought we all
So-
talked about that during these
Okay, but we
discussions.
didn't, okay, so I guess when we took the vote, in my mind, I was just voting on correcting it, but we're saying that was it. We're done. Good,
Yeah, that was my understanding, too.
great, okay,
Yep.
sorry.
So I think we,
So, do I have a motion to
do you have any,
adjourn?
yeah, do you have any more?
Oh, wait,
Any
public-
more business?
We have
The
any more
ki-
comments?
Citizens, any citizen
Any
comments?
citizen comments?
Thank you for your hard work.
Echo.
Welcome.
From the school committee.
Everybody okay? Good. Motion to adjourn subcommittee.
Second?
So
All in favor? I'm done.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the business of the Finance Committee. Okay, we do have a minutes of Finance Committee from October 24th. Didn't we just approve these?
No, we did the subcommittee.
Oh, this is the, okay. These, but I think these are pretty trivial.
Minutes for the-
We accepted,
Exactly.
yeah. Could I have a motion on the minutes of October 24th?
motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. So, now that we've just heard from the Finance Subcommittee, Guidelines Subcommittee, is there any further discussion of the recommendation from the Finance Subcommittee?
Motion to approve.
But we have a
Wait,
question.
we have a question. Yes. Okay, so just to be clear, and maybe this is helpful to folks who may watch this in the future or watching at home. The conversation in the meeting that we were just participating in was the Guidelines Subcommittee. We are all members of that, and it makes a recommendation to the Finance Committee. Now, the Finance Committee typically meets on a separate night, but because of the squeeze schedule and the way this is going, we have closed the meeting of the Guidelines Subcommittee, and we have now convened a meeting of the Finance Committee. We're all still here. And we are now going to discuss whether or not to accept the recommendation of the Guidelines Subcommittee,
Of ourselves.
of ourselves. It is kind of a tautology.
Can I just
So,
interject
so
and say,
therefore,
never-
I move to approve our recommendation, our guidelines, subcommittee recommendation.
Is it clear that although the guidelines committee corrected the error and added the $50,000, is it clear that there is still $100,000?
Yes,
Yes.
it is clear that they're still, that the budget that they are currently contemplating is $100,000 greater than what we are recommending.
Than
as
our
a guideline.
corrected guideline.
The corrected guideline,
Yeah.
yes. It's more like 97 now. but That's up to them. So, well, I think we have a motion on the floor.
To approve.
Didn't have a second.
I know, I don't have a second. Oh, do I have a second?
You have a second.
I have a second, okay. So is there any discussion of the motion to approve the recommendation of the Guidelines Subcommittee? Seeing none?
So I'd like to just say one quick thing,
Okay.
if I may. It seems to me that they have a lot of flexibility to meet a guideline or not, given ZBB and a lot of transfers and a lot of decisions that they make. And it just seems to me that this seems to be a pretty equitable compromise in that we corrected something that initially, ideally, we would have done differently. And now it's a little bit over them to perhaps try to, make a motion in that direction also. So strikes me as being eminently reasonable.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I think we're ready for a vote. All in favor of the recommendation of the Guidelines Subcommittee? Looks to be unanimous. Parshar? Are you in favor of the recommendation of the Guidelines Subcommittee?
I am.
Okay, that seems unanimous. Okay, so we've done that.
can I just make a comment? Next year, we traditionally have had the subcommittee be the committee. The membership is overlapped. Next year, we might want to think about making the subcommittee a real subcommittee. It doesn't have to be everybody. could,
I
it's something-
think we all.
Have we talked
Yeah,
about
I
that
think we've
before?
talked about this, and it is a committee which typically meets on different nights,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone who is a member of this committee has a right to attend.
Okay.
And if they do attend, they participate. So
Okay,
the
okay.
alternative would be to come up with a group which is a smaller group, but that has not been the practice, that's all. You're, as a member of the Finance Committee, you have a right to participate in the guidelines process, the guidelines.
Well,
discussions.
I actually agree with Mary. I think that, consideration should be given to whether this should be, the guidelines should initially be prepared by a subcommittee, a real subcommittee, as opposed to this whole committee. I mean, I don't really have any feeling one way or the other, but I think it's kind of crazy to have two different bodies that have the same membership.
Mary, are you proposing indeed that there be a separate and smaller subcommittee?
Actually, this year it worked fine, okay? I remember other years, though, it was sometimes difficult to get a quorum at the subcommittee. I think it's really up to, I'm just throwing that out as an option for next year. The people who are doing, whoever becomes the chair of the sub, to put that out there. I think it worked well this year, I do. But it's an option.
Right.
I thought it worked well, too.
Yeah, me too. I thought we
Yeah.
did a
I
great
agree,
job.
I agree. I just
I-
think it's not a bad
I am-
thing to look into.
I am
So what
personally
was-
in favor of keeping the current practice
You
the
are?
way it is.
I would support that, Tom.
I do. as well.
What was the quorum for the subcommittee?
It is the same.
It's the same.
It's the
Yeah.
same.
It's eight.
Yeah.
We always had that. so we didn't-
Okay, so Mary, this is actually your agenda item.
Before we get off that, I'd just like to say, the reason I'm in favor of following the practice is because the work of the Guidelines Subcommittee comprises, I think, the very essence of what the Finance Committee does. And therefore, I think it's imperative to maintain a committee of the whole as the subcommittee, so.
Well, another way you could run it is you just don't have a subcommittee, you just have the business of this committee be
That's
That is
creating the
true.
guideline.
That is true.
That's,
Not sure why it's divided. It makes,
You would have to lead that then, right?
that's true. You would have,
the chair
the
would-
chair would
Chair
lead
would
it
lead
all, yeah.
Why?
It would be,
Well, you could, I could
still be a-
defer, you know.
Yeah, it could still be a guidelines committee, or guidelines focus. You could
Guidelines
have a
chair, yeah,
guidelines
we could-
chair.
Guidelines chair. I don't
that's
know.
what good committee, right? She's.
That's
No,
what
I
it is,
know,
but that's
but
what we
that's-
have.
That's what we have.
So I think it's, is it a distinction without a difference? Are we really?
Well, I thought you were saying that it would go back to Dean.
No, it would.
It would.
If it was the
If it
business
was
of the
a FinCom,
committee,
he
it
would
would
be
probably.
he would be
yeah,
responsible.
The chair would be the chair's job to lead.
What's the next item on the agenda, Mr. Chairman?
Okay, all right. So we have.
Sorry about that, Dean.
We have a vote, I so declare.
okay, the next.
Okay, so the next one is one that Mary really wanted to bring to the party, which is, what is the goal of our role as observers? Because we're in a position with a couple of committees now where we're being asked to be very active. Now, John and I participated in an observer function with the Budget Subcommittee of the schools 2 years ago, was that now? 2 years ago? And we were very active. We were full participants. The only thing we couldn't do was vote, but we were definitely called upon to do homework and bring results and, contribute. And that is far beyond observing. That is real participation.
Although that report was never actually written, was
It
it?
was not, but okay. However, we are in the same position with D. D is on a committee that is,
No, I'm not. A task force.
oh, I'm sorry, it's a task force. It's a short term, but nonetheless, in your observer role,
No, I'm a liaison.
okay, so,
That's how it's constructed in the
oh, in the charge, you're a
Charge, yeah.
liaison.
I'm a liaison.
That is beyond our capacity to do it as a you're a non-voting.
I'm a non-voter.
You're a non-voting, okay. So, by and large, observing is exactly that. It is observing. But we are being, called upon to do things now a little bit more often that are a little more.
Why?
Because people value the balance of having a member of the Finance Committee offer, some important insight as, not that they necessarily represent the Finance Committee. I think that, in any committee where there are liaison members, they participate with an eye towards the priorities of the committee from which they come. I participated in the CPC as a liaison from the Natural Resources Commission. And in that context, there are many applicants who come and they have, they may want to have land, land purchases or other things that come up for which the Natural Resources Commission would want to have some input. And so I would, it was shuttle diplomacy with the NRC. So that the liaison role is a valid role on a committee. And so people are looking to the Finance Committee now to take that observer role a step further and have us liaise, have us be active within the context of committee meetings. And so that's just,
Conflict of interest.
well, it's, we are,
Influencing the committee.
it's at the request
Yeah.
of these other entities that they would
I think
like
they
to-
realize that eventually they're going to be sitting there presenting to us,
Yeah.
and they want a little guidance, was my experience, on how might this be thought of.
Any other committee I've been an observer on, they've welcomed input, whoever the Finance Committee observer is.
So the
So
question then becomes, how much input and how involved?
Well, you're not a vote, you don't vote.
No,
You don't
but
vote.
you can influence people's thinking. You don't have to actually vote. It would depend on the situation
Yeah, you
and the
use your good
committee,
judgment.
but
Well, I don't think that we're looking to be intrusive. In the case that Dee is currently sitting in, she's actively been invited in as within the charter of the committee. This is a seat that is reserved for her. So her input is sought. It's not like we're trying to, in an inordinate way, influence something that's going on in another part of the town.
I
So
would like to think it's, maybe a different word, would be inform rather than influence. You're bringing information that's relevant to this committee, to the Finance Committee, to a different group who is meeting to solve a problem or address a problem.
Which sounds entirely appropriate.
Yeah. So is this kind of where you want this to?
Yeah,
conversation go?
I was just thinking that people who are new to the committee especially, at least I know, I was a little bit confused about, do I just sit there like a dummy in the meetings? Or can I speak? Can I answer questions? Can I actively participate? And it's gonna be different for every committee, but,
And
Dee's, I think, is unique.
Yeah, Dee's unique,
Is
but
unique.
it's been my experience that input is periodically sought.
Yes.
Like you're sitting there as a Finance Committee member, literally in the audience, just like the chair of the Select Board is here, and he chose not to opine, which is fine, but we sought his opinion, and sometimes our opinion is sought when we are in the audience. Yes, sir?
I chose not to make a statement because I could only be speaking for myself, and you were asking the select board a question.
Very good.
I
That's
could not
fair.
respond.
That's a fair response, Mike.
And I think that's a distinction we all should try to make. You're not there as your own self, you're there as a representative of your committee.
Right.
And so you should not be opining, and you should not be offering opinions. You should take information that's asked of you. If it needs to come back to your committee, bring it back here. And then at the next meeting, you can say, I've raised it with my committee, and you ask for the Finance Committee's point of view, here it is, right? But you ask me a factual question, happy to answer it.
So it's like being a lawyer. You're not being a lawyer or an advocate. You're providing information. And exchanging information between the two bodies, but you're not taking a position and advocating your opinion or trying to influence the committee's deliberations, other than through providing neutral information.
That's right, unless you take it back and you ask me to go to the select board and get an answer to your question, I'll come to your next finance committee meeting and let you know what the answer is.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so that's a good,
That's good.
good observation, thanks.
Good, thank you.
Okay, so now I have a chair's report. Okay, so, Carrie, did you print the calendars? Are they in our packet?
Yes. They're here.
So, the first thing I wanted to do is just go over the winter calendar, which I can't find in my packet. It's here somewhere. Stapled to my.
Right there, the one underneath, the colored, no, under your hand.
Oh, there it is, thank you, separate. Okay, so we continue to have a busy schedule, pretty much through the winter. We're gonna
bucks.
look over the warrant articles and do a little bit of review on each of the, you looking for something
I got
else
it.
separate? Oh, here, it should be in here. Looks like this. It's a separate standalone sheet, it's not stapled anymore. There you go,
Thank you.
okay?
Thank you.
So we have some review meetings to go over the budgets that have been filed, because the budgets will get filed when the warrant closes. So we have some review meetings there. I'm not sure we need all these February meetings. We really will be doing our review of the warrant articles after we go to the hearings. The whole point of the hearings is so that we can get information and make an informed decision about how to come out with a finance committee report. So we have 2 meetings, weekly meetings in February, for which I don't have a strong desire to have meetings if we don't need them. 13th and the 20th, we could have one meeting
Yeah,
and
that's,
probably be
yeah,
fine.
that would be good.
I don't think we need all those meetings. So let's say the warrant goes out on the 7th. How about we skip the 13th and we use the 20th? Is that?
Well, actually, Dina,
Yep.
sorry, I don't mean to be a contrarian here, but I was thinking we should keep the 13th if for some reason we find that we do need an additional meeting. We
Okay.
would at least then have it as an option, which we may
Okay,
or
we
may
can
not
leave it there, it's
choose
fine.
to exercise.
We can leave it there and
It
then
just seems to
maybe
me
not
if-
schedule it later, when we get to
Exactly,
that
so
point.
I was going to suggest just the reverse, is let's schedule the 13th and table the 20th for the time being unless required.
Need it.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
All right, fine. Yeah, okay, right now, this one is probably not happening. The 20th is probably not happening. And, let's see. So we have a meeting on the 16th, and Mary, I may need some help from you on that, to chair that,
Which, January?
January.
Okay.
So it's gonna be out of town.
That's different, our agenda packet says the 23rd is the next, so the 16th is definitely the next.
No, we have another meeting.
We have another
this
meeting
year.
in, yeah, we don't have December on here.
It should be what?
December 19th.
19th, right, okay, that's,
And what's the purpose of that meeting?
That's your regular monthly meeting.
it's just a monthly meeting, and Carrie needs to bring us, any reports or anything that needs attention. I don't generate work. I'm very responsive.
Dean, it would not break our hearts if you didn't have the meeting on
We didn't have the
December
meeting on
19th.
the 19th of December, right before Christmas?
Right.
Really? All right, I'll take that under advisement. We might be able to take that one off the table unless Carrie has some emergencies.
Okay, so the 16th is when you're not going to be here.
Yeah, I think that's.
Grinch Carrie.
Gary, it's all on you.
Reassign meetings.
Yes, I'm gonna be in Vietnam, so.
Right, I know.
So.
Does that mean you're not going to advocate any warrant articles?
No.
Is that why you're not
Sounds
showing
like,
up?
yeah, I'm not showing up for that. Oh, okay, can we just get back? All right, so, the one thing that is not on here, because I didn't have the ability to edit this and get a response back to Carrie quickly enough, is I would like to see, once the warrant closes and we know what the articles are, I would like to see people write a paragraph of the committee they have observed, and so we have something. It could be very preliminary, but I want that in by our meeting of the 23rd. Everybody who's been observing a committee, look at the Finance Committee report from the previous year and look at whether or not your committee had a big write-up, a splashy thing, or what was necessary. The CPC is always there, the schools are always there, and there are some other observer reports that are printed in the warrant. But we need to, last year was too much of a crush for the town staff trying to pull the Finance Committee report together. We need to just, so if you have those in a preliminary form, we can always tune them up after the hearings. But if we wait until the hearings are over, we don't have a lot of time to get that all assembled and over to Carrie. So I'd like to see some preliminary cut at an observer report that would go in the Finance Committee report. And you can look at the previous reports and see, well, is my committee going to belong in here, or whether it's been covered? Just by the 23rd. That's the only thing I want to add to this calendar.
It's only if there's an article.
Yeah, if you look at the Finance Committee report, and if you don't have your copy from the previous year, they're online.
No, I mean, this year, it's only, if there's an article in the warrant that's.
No, it doesn't have anything to do with the warrant article. The Finance Committee report has
okay.
financial information in it regarding the work of other committees that we observe. So we have a budget write-up for the schools, for each of the schools. We have a budget write-up that has to do with the town itself. We have a description of how is the CPC, what do we think about the CPC. There are observer reports in the Finance Committee report, but it's not like the Cemetery Committee. There's not an observer report in the Finance Committee report for the Cemetery Committee. So it's not every committee that ends up needing, it's mostly the highlights of the ones that are spending most of our money, So I just need to take a little bit of the heat off of Carrie and her staff, which did a yeoman service last year to pull it together, at the 11th hour, literally the 11th hour. So we'll try to avoid that crush this year. Otherwise, I think this calendar's pretty much I'm okay with. So that was something I wanted to do as part of my chair report. In terms of things going on that let's see, what page am I on here? I think I'm going to just jump to observer reports, and I will talk to the select board activities and the school committee activities when it comes around to me. So I'll start here, and then I'll come back around to any chair report information.
Okay, so I'm the observer to the Community Preservation Committee, and that is where I first learned that there's a big disconnect between how much is being funded by the town and how much is being funded by the CPC for these multi-year, multi-million-dollar projects. So that's how I became aware that, we're funding these things in little slivers here, little slivers here, and this is starting to become a concern to the CPC as well. And I think they're also concerned that the money that they're allocating is being banked, where they would prefer that proposals come to them bounded in a way that work can begin more quickly, or that there are clear milestones rather than just giving money that may or may not be spent, and the scope of the project kind of moves as time goes forward. So I think that it's a great committee, and I think they're also working hard to kind of get their arms around a better visibility to funding of these multi-year, multi-million-dollar projects.
Okay, great.
As liaison to the public safety, we just meet with the fire department. It's not a ongoing meeting, just so everybody's aware of that one. I did not meet with either of them. I met with the fire department, I think 2 months ago or so, and I still have to schedule for the police chief, so we gotta get on that. And I was not able to attend the public health.
Liaison to the task force on capital planning.
Gotta preface it.
Yeah, I have to preface it. And we're really just getting our feet wet. We held our second meeting this past week, and now all of the people there are 9 people, 9 voting members of the committee who now have been able to attend at least one of the meetings. So I think we're just developing a strategy, I hope, for this process that is the outcome of this task force. The task force is not a process going forward. The task force is developing a process to go forward on how the town and the schools and any other vested interest will be looking at capital expenses, capital projects, and the timeline of that, hopefully. But we don't have any concrete direction at the moment. We're still kind of feeling our way through what is the real charge and how do we get our arms around a process.
So, that sounds very squishy.
It is.
It is
And it makes
squishy.
me very unhappy, right?
It-
Because,
Well, at this point, it's not to make any decisions, it's not to come up with a timeline.
right, no, I know. It
of
sounds
when-
like it's being softened far away from that which the Finance Committee asked, which is we need a long-term capital plan for the town. A process is nice, but the process needs to have an outcome. And if it's really gonna drift far from that, then, I don't know what we want to do as a committee, but that's not what we were looking for.
What are you thinking of as an outcome?
I want a long-term capital plan, that's what I
Right.
want. I don't want a process, I want an answer.
I agree. I think that there are all these capital projects, such as the new fire and safety building and the new Concord Public Works, and lots of other projects. Somebody needs to think through the sequence of how those are going to be done. And that's what I would have expected to come out of this.
Okay, I will take that information back.
But
Because the charge of this task force is to develop the process of how
All right.
whatever entity is formed as a result of this process, or if it's some sort of body that looks at buildings, or, it is very squishy. I
Squishy.
can't even describe
And
it
it's
any
squishy.
better than that, because
Right.
it's coming, each
Well, because
person is
I-
coming from different directions on what's the role, what is capital planning, and who should be involved in it.
Firm it up. If you want me to go, I'll go. It needs to be firmed up. It does.
the
I am-
charge-
I
the
am
char-
not backing off of this.
the
I know
charge-
what the committee wants to do, but
The
to me,
char-
this
the
was
charge is-
critical.
The charge has
charge-
come from the select board.
Right.
Okay,
And the
good.
select board has directed.
Has
to
made it
develop-
squishy.
Yes.
Has developed.
They have.
The
Yes, yes.
charge is to develop a process to be used annually to develop a plan.
Uh-huh. I want a plan.
I
do. I
and
want
the
a
word
plan.
annually is a problem, because you don't want a one-year plan. You want a 30-year plan.
No, no,
You
to
say,
annually develop a 10-year plan.
Okay. I'd
And
say,
how long is that gonna take? Updated every year.
huh?
And how will it
I-
go?
Okay, but,
I hear
I'm gonna
you.
start going to
I
there,
hear
then, if
you,
that's,
I
because
understand
I
where
am
you're coming
wild.
from. It's,
Yeah.
I hear you.
It is not prudent, right? It's certainly from as a financial policy, we need this, the town needs it, we told them they need it, we wrote a letter last year.
To be clear,
Yeah.
they had multiple meetings where they discussed this at the select board, and this is what they came
Right.
up with.
Okay.
There were different voices, some who were advocating for what you want, which is, let's go
Right.
create a
Let's get it-
capital.
let's get a plan.
Let's put a committee together to create a capital plan,
Okay,
and this is where they ended up.
Okay.
So,
it's
it-
question, that's
it-
fine.
it-
We're not,
it's
if
just-
that's not
That's,
what we want
uh,
to be, we
it's
can
not
still
what-
tell
That's a
them.
mistake. That is a
we
mistake.
advocated.
It's a mistake.
Because it's not going to, help us.
No.
You need, and what happens every year is, oh my gosh, we need a new middle school. Oh my gosh, we need a new public works. Why didn't anybody tell about this?
Allow it. I'm
We
telling
need,
you,
we
should
need
not
somebody
allow
to
it.
say, we're gonna do the middle school, then we're gonna do the public works building 5 years later, and we're gonna do the safety building for 10 years later, and we're gonna do this other thing 25 years from now, because everybody just says, oh, now we need this. Nobody's got any plan, and we gotta think about this.
It's not what we asked for, but it is what it is, because that's how it ended up.
As a point of clarification, there was a capital facilities plan or document.
2002.
Well, no, I believe that we saw a draft of something.
Yes, we did.
Last year, but I don't recall having seen a final of that report, for which a consultant was hired to create
For
this.
the town.
Oh,
For the town.
For the
A
town.
draft,
Yes,
a draft
right,
was
right,
delivered a
Yes.
few months ago to the select board, but it was not a very comprehensive, it was more of a presentation of here's how we're
Yes.
doing it, but it was not a complete report.
So
It
the
didn't time or
clarification,
prioritize.
the clarification I was seeking is, how, if at all, is that report supposed to dovetail with capital planning?
That report does not include the schools. So this process that Dee's involved with is more comprehensive. The idea is that it will include school, any kind of school activity. So, and that did not.
Am I incorrect in my belief that the town, in fact, owns the school buildings?
CPS, but.
With the exception of, so it strikes me that over the years, it's become clear that we chronically get into problems where buildings that we expected to last decades turn out to have been ill-maintained and therefore only are lasting years. And this is how we get confronted with these emergency needs for buildings. And it strikes me that these the report on the condition of our capital facilities should be at least a subset, if not directly dovetailed with the whole act of planning for new capital facilities. And we ought to be all extremely aware of what the condition of our existing capital facilities are, so that we are better able to gird our loins for what expenditure.
And that's what the capital plan will give you, just exactly what you're asking for.
Right.
It has an inventory of the buildings, their age, their condition, what the deferred maintenance is, and when you're gonna renew them. That is prudent financial planning.
and that-
Concord needs that.
And that's what
That's
this
what we asked
consultant
for.
has at least presented made a presentation on. And their presentation included that kind of inventory, but also scenario building when they because they interviewed each department, which said, we see this kind of use of our buildings, it's inefficient, and then they came up with scenarios for each building of how it could be reconfigured, or how it might be bumped out, or how it could be replaced. So this is a major report that has yet to be delivered. I don't know when it'll be delivered, Tom. But it's in the works, and it does include forward planning with input from each of the town departments about their considerations for future need, and how well the space that they're in is working or not working for them. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, it is, but there's also the gray area of these projects that are not the tier one projects that are in the operating budget, capital expenditures in the operating budget, but it's also, this gray area is the ever-expanding projects that are within the levy limit, but are debt.
Exactly.
And that area, there has been some discussion about how do we look at those? It might not be a building, it might be a campus of some sort.
It might be a park.
Or a park. So really,
Or a pond.
we're just in the discussion part about what do we want to bite off in in this process? Is it excluded debt projects only? Or would it be some of these, I want to say, tier 2 type projects? And I don't really know what is going to be
You
the
and
outcome.
you and I have spoken, and I'm a big advocate for using the charge, which is looking at a process to look at these debt projects within the levy limit, which are these multi-year, because it fits neatly into your current charge.
It
We
does.
don't, we could maybe change the policies, maybe we could go after the warrant articles when they come up, but there should be a process that gives the town visibility. When 1 year we tell them it's gonna cost 1.6 million, and then 12 months later, the cost went up to 2.9 million. There should be a process, and I'm hoping that that's one of the things that you can do within your charge. The bigger thing, which is the excluded debt, my opinion, that's not gonna happen this year. I don't know, maybe not. Never mind.
So thank you for your observer report, Ms. Ortner. Very instructive.
liaison.
Your liaison report, very instructive. Andrea?
Thank you for the comments and feedback.
Yes. But honestly, Dean, I mean, if what they're after, and I don't know what the arguments were from the other voices in the room, that they ended up at this spot, which sounds to me suboptimal, what was our reaction to it, right? So if we're the group that asked for it, which I believe we were, and the League of Women Voters also asked for it in the press, what was their response to us to say,
mean,
that's not a good
There
idea?
is the select, what you're talking
Yes,
about,
the
their
select board.
response. It's the select board
What is their response to us? Did they come back and have a conversation with you to say, that was a good idea, Dean, but here's a better one?
Well, they're coming up with what's the time frame on this? Like, is this committee gonna be?
6 months. We're
Right, so
supposed
in the
to
end
be
of 6
finished.
months, will that they then start the committee that
That
you're looking
next-
for?
I don't know.
That is that,
That is, I
doubt
believe
it.
that that's the objective, that we will have,
right,
I doubt it.
So,
but I don't know
Because
what the
that's what we asked for
deliverable
was a plan.
is.
so not to divert our committee too deeply, but I'll try to summarize my understanding of the way the discussion went within the context of the select board. And I'll do the best I can. It's not going to necessarily be perfect. Fundamentally, the select board was divided about where the decision process will exist to greenlight a project, okay? And, some voices were saying, we need a capital planning committee to establish the priorities and bring forward a plan that says it's now time to do X. And there were other voices on the board who said, that is our purview
Good.
to make that decision. So we just need a process that somebody brings us information and we discuss and decide to either greenlight or do it. So having this go around in a circle for 3 or 4 meetings about whether there would be a committee
Right.
doing the capital planning of the town and being a standing committee, or whether there would just be a process whereby departments would say, I need X, and the select board themselves would somehow shoulder that load and make those decisions. Everybody threw up their hands and said, let's have a committee that decides what the process is going to be. And that's where we are.
So,
they just were unresolved.
but that committee, the capital planning committee could make plans and make recommendations to the select board. Of course, the select board still has its autonomy, and of course, town meeting in the end is the body that approves, but they could make recommendations as opposed to just doing nothing.
To be clear, there was resistance to a standing committee who did that on a recurring, constant basis. There was a resistance to that. There was the
Doesn't make
sense
sense.
that we can do it ourselves without that. And so, since we're making that decision with our autonomy
working so
anyway,
well. That we had,
So-
$100 million middle school that came.
Along these lines,
the recommendation of the committee that Dee is on may well still be, we need a standing committee to do this.
okay, so along these lines, we also, before we recommended the capital planning, we recommended a permanent building committee instead of ad hoc building committees, because we've had an ad hoc building committee that said, okay, we're going to build the most expensive elementary school in the state. We ended up building a high school that had a budget of $120 million, and after we voted a $90 million budget, so we had to redo that. So maybe we should get some people that know something about building from project to project, and they can learn how to deal with the state and so on. So we recommended that. And as far as I know, nothing has happened with that either. So, I don't know what the fear is of getting recommendations. Of course, the select board is still gonna have autonomy, and the town meeting will still have autonomy. Why not get people that are making substantive recommendations as opposed to just, recommendations about process?
I do think there was a consensus, Phil, that is not off the table, but there was enough pushback against it that they felt like, let's have these folks go off and then come back and tell us what's optimal, and then we'll have to take their report and make some plans. So that's really where you are, right, Dee?
That's where I am.
Yeah, she's been voted on. She's been voted onto the island, you know? So we're still going around. Wade, do you have anything to offer? Oh, Andrea, I'm sorry, I thought, yeah.
Very short.
Okay.
I actually went to my first Council on Aging meeting, and I'm sorry to say I don't have the name of the guest speaker. They had a speaker from the Housing Authority. And main focus and concern is the aging population of Concord and where people are going to live. Because rents, cost of housing, rents in, I'm not familiar with the news, but it's.
Yeah, it's over by,
Yeah,
up by Maynard, on the way to Maynard, yeah.
Yeah.
Acton, Maynard.
Yep.
Yeah. But apparently the rents took a big jump, and that's where a lot of people live, and a lot of people have apparently said, we can't stay here anymore.
Wow.
Where can we go? And they're looking to leave Concord because they have no choice. And that was the focus of the whole meeting, is the housing for, primarily housing for the aging population.
That's what okay, thank you. That's what the Council on Aging concerns itself with, so that's good.
So I'm the liaison to the rec committee, and the rec committee did not meet in November, so I'll report in January on the November-December meeting.
I do not have anything to report.
I'm the liaison to Municipal Light Board, but I have nothing to report either.
So I'm the I'm the observer to Minuteman, and I do have some things to report. So they have not yet closed their budget, so they have some meetings in this month that they're going to finalize their budget. So I went to the last meeting, it still wasn't done. I spoke to them, it's going to be in December, so I'll be in communication with them to come back to us with what's their number. One thing that may impact that, though, is I think I told you that Belmont was going to have a vote to see if they would rescind. They did not rescind.
Oh, they didn't.
They did not. So they are going out. So on June 30th, 20, they're leaving. So there was a lot of hope that they would stay in, and they voted against it. So that's going to have implications for all the members. So they're not going to pay, remember they came back and said, gee, if we pay this debt thing over, well,
That's
nothing, there'll be no payment on, right.
Any noise about anybody else, any other towns?
No,
wanting-
this was the rescission vote from a couple of years ago. In terms of coming in, there was some hope that Watertown was going to put something on their warrant, but that did not come through. So right now, we have nobody else coming in, and we have one town that we knew was leaving is really leaving, which is Belmont.
But we still have the school is fairly full. It's not like
Oh, it
we're
is.
suffering from.
Oh, it is. Oh, yeah. In fact, it will make it more difficult than for Belmont to get students in, which they weighed in as part of their decision. So the implication is just now that there's less coverage on the debt and so forth.
How much do we have as a placeholder for their budget next year? Do you remember?
I don't have it off the top of my head. I can look in my,
700 and something.
it sounds right to me, but I have to look it up, I can tell you. But soon, I think I'll hear on that. So that's number one. And number two, just a reminder, Dean, you and I and Mary are going to be at the COA next Wednesday on the 11th at 1 p.m. And there's going to be a Meet the Finance Committee, if anybody else wants to join us. So we wanted to have it be as an introduction and also talk about what we do and perhaps get some feedback from the folks who come by that day. So we're in the COA.
COA is?
Council on Aging, sorry, Council on Aging. So it's at
Harvey
Harvey, it's at
Wheeler.
Harvey
Harvey
Wheeler
Wheeler.
at 1
I just didn't
PM
connect it
on the 11th, if anybody else wants to come.
Christine, is it extraordinary for Minuteman to have not closed its budget as of this date?
I don't think so, but I've only observed them now 2 years. So last year, I think it was early December, because first they said to me it would be on the 5th, but then I looked to see there isn't a meeting until, I think, the 17th. So I'm going to call, I'm going to call the finance fellow and see if he's got any answers for me. But he knows we're waiting.
Is
to
their
see what
fiscal year, does their fiscal year end
It's the
on
same,
June?
yeah, it's 6:30, it's the same. So this is it's the proposed budget. So this is, this is the proposal,
okay. I
Tom.
thought
It's
you were-
not the,
oh,
no,
okay.
it's the 2021.
I thought you were saying they hadn't closed
No,
their
no,
books.
no, no, no.
Oh,
It's,
okay.
it's the same thing we were doing with the other schools.
Gotcha.
Yeah. That's it for me.
So I had the good fortune to attend the retirement board meeting, which was on Richard's, in Richard's place. The, thank you. About a 6-hour meeting, I think. But, sorry, but there was one really important takeaway, and that was there's a warrant article coming our way that had to do with the board wanting to raise the base amount to which the cost of living is then applied going forward. And it's a warrant article coming our way, so I won't go into it now because we're going to have several opportunities to look into that in greater detail. But just an FYI that it's heading our way.
The DPW meeting is next week, so I don't have anything to report this week, other than it'll be interesting to find out how much of the snow and ice budget got chewed up by this storm. And I also know that they have a lot of equipment that they want to replace, and I only saw 325,000 in the budget on here, so I'll have to ask how that compares with what they need. Yeah. So that's all I have.
So the library met, I think it was last week. I had come in a little bit late, but I didn't miss much on the front end, as I was told. But on the back end, the library project in and of itself has been moving forward. The library project was approved by the HDC, but there were a couple of people that actually appealed as of November the 7th. Suggesting a number of things that they had objected to sort of at the beginning of the project. This appeal is going to, or this suit is basically going to delay the project for 9 months to probably a year.
It's a suit?
It's a lawsuit.
It's a lawsuit.
Yeah. And as a result of the lawsuit, that raised my flag because I was like, we just had a conversation about lawsuits and the budget around lawsuits and legal expenses. I asked if they had any general sense around that. It happened so quickly, so recently that they couldn't put a number on it. So we should just be attuned to that maybe turning into a number that we're going to have to address.
But isn't that against the town or against the library corporation?
Well, the town, as I was told, was they may have to participate, but I don't know to what degree, given that the corporation, it is the corporations is involved in that capacity. So there's more to come there, but just as an FYI, that's the update around
Brian,
the library.
in terms of the suit, is it an individual or a group of citizens or an
It's two
organization?
people. It's two people. One is in a butter to the library, and then it's another gentleman, but I don't know who that gentleman actually is.
Ned Perry. Ned Perry.
Okay. It's,
But if it's with the HDC, that could involve legal expenses for the town.
for the town, right.
And separately, it could also be the library corporation.
Correct.
That might be held.
Correct.
Okay.
So that should just be on our radar as we think about this one.
Ned is a lawyer, as you probably know.
Right.
Okay, back to me. Yes, Andrea.
I did forget, there was an issue that came up regarding accessibility for people with disabilities, parking
Oh, for the library?
for the library.
For the new, and for the new, yeah, they
Yes,
do,
and
they do
that
have a
there's
plan.
only gonna be 2 parking spaces on Main Street. And what's
in the Emerson umbrella parking.
Yes, yeah.
And apparently the library needs any parking on the Sudbury Road side where there are rhododendrons. No, not that, no, because that's where they get deliveries, but where there are rhododendrons, there was a suggestion that parking spaces be put there, and that was denied.
It was denied by the HDC, by the library corporation. They said, no, we don't want to put them there.
So, that's an issue.
I have a question about, maybe this is one, Brian, for you, which is, when the library corporation wanted to expand anyway in their plan, did they have to go to get permission about the number of parking spaces that this would entail, the addition would entail, and how would that work?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to go back and ask and get back to you.
Mrs. Crouch, they did have to go to the planning board
Uh-huh,
for their typical site review, is that what you're asking me?
yes.
Yeah, so they've been to the planning board all summer, I attended a couple of the planning board meetings, and they went through the regular process there. I don't know if they went to the zoning board, I'm sure, actually they did. So the planning board was giving advice to the zoning board, so they followed the regular process.
Great. Do you know if they have to add any more, or?
You know, I have not been able to attend the last couple of meetings of the planning board, I just find out, but I believe the zoning board was supposed to have approved it in October, but I can find out and let everybody know.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're back around to me, more or less. Parshar, would you like to offer an update on the observer reports? Beyond what?
I have not been able to attend the last couple of meetings because of travel, but I will, when I reach out to the planning board on the status of the review, I'll kind of see where they are with their budget and everything. And I was able to observe their hearing on, their strategic plan, if you will. It was very sparsely attended, and I'm sure they're gonna put out a report to town meeting, but I'll inquire about that, so in terms of what the status is, and report back next time.
Great.
Okay. All right, so I attended some select board meetings and some school committee meetings. So, select board has seen some feedback from the assessors, and the assessors have reported that there's been a 10% drop, a slight 10% drop in applicants for senior means tested tax relief, which they haven't got a full explanation for why that's the case. Some of the explanation might be that in the initial year, some people applied who then were declined because they didn't qualify, and then they didn't come back and apply the following year, so that might explain some of the reason that there are fewer applicants this year, but that still doesn't fully explain why applications seem to have dropped. So, it's early days with the senior means tested tax relief. The PEG board there's a little bit of confusion regarding how that's going to settle out in terms of its financial, standing. They are not an enterprise fund, and yet they are something of an independent entity that is fully captive underneath the town, and they don't actually participate in the town budget. They get funding through the money that we get from Comcast. So it's a very unusual situation, and they sat at the select board meeting and said, can we please get some direction here? Mostly is what they're looking for, some direction from the select board. The select board received a report from our appointing authority, the moderator, regarding town meeting and what she felt were, the go-forward things for town meeting. She had a full report on a survey that she did, and that included, what do you think about clickers, and what do you think about this and that? And there wasn't anything tremendous, although there is some adjustment being considered for when town meeting will start and how long it will end, and not leave wide open the last day of town meeting, where you can just go off into the midnight hours, deciding the last few things on the planning board's, agenda. So what they're gonna try to do is add 15 minutes to the no new business end of the meeting. And over the course of 3 nights, they should gather 45 additional minutes, which is really all you usually need on that last night, is another hour or so to get your work done. So they think if they try, and the moderator said that she would also try to rein in some of the testimonial time that we spend, and that, where we're not really conducting any business. So there's a few things that she's trying to do. They do have a quote for what it would cost us to rent. The idea that is that we would rent a lot of the electronics associated with clickers and using electronic voting. It's a modest amount of money, but she's very sensitive to the fact that town meeting is a budget line item. It's between $8,000 and $11,000 to, for a 3-night rental or actually for a 4-night rental of the equipment. So that's, she doesn't consider that to be nothing, and it's a very up and down thing when you look at the survey, how much people really want it. So she's sensitive to that, and we may have electronic voting. She's probably looking at doing maybe a 1-night rental this year, and we'll see how it goes for one night. That's a possibility as another way of getting the camel's nose under the tent there. The Housing Authority was back. They are looking for a warrant article for $500K from free cash. So be aware, they're back. In addition, the Select Board went through the slate of warrant articles that they anticipate that they will basically propose. And the one that we had suggested, which is that they create a stabilization fund, is on the table, but there's no number. So I don't know, should we be providing them a number? And if we are going to provide them a number or a recommendation, we should make some action maybe tonight, or I don't know when we have a meeting, but we are thinking of not having a meeting on the 19th. So if we want to think about that and avoid a meeting, we may want to have another thing to do before we leave tonight, and that's make a recommendation. I can write a letter and say, this is our recommendation, and get it on there, because they're going to create that article, and then between now and we have to have.
This is the middle school.
No, this is the middle school. It's the stabilization fund for the middle school,
Yeah.
yes.
Do you have a number in mind, Dean?
Well, I'm just going off past practice, which was 2 million, was the initial. So that would be my off the top of the head number, would be a way to start.
That would keep us below the, we'd still be above 5% and below 10%.
What is our free cash balance?
11 million.
We don't have it certified yet for this
Okay.
year, we will shortly.
But there's $2 million available.
There definitely is $2 million available.
And we'd still be above 5% of the.
No, we're at
And it would
we're-
still
we're
be
at
on
11%,
account. The
aren't
thing
we?
is, it's not going anywhere. It's just being,
Aren't we at the 11% right now?
No, at the end of town meeting, we went below 10%, somewhere 9.5%
Free cash, right?
free cash.
You mean after all the articles
After
that,
all of the articles.
okay.
It will be certified above 10%. I'm not, probably not significantly above, but you have $1 million in the fiscal '21 budget.
Budget, yeah.
So that will
Which
bring you below 10%.
10%.
But there's still money
Well
that
above
would be-
5.
yes,
We're well
there's
above
still-
5.
Well, 500K will come out for the affordable housing.
Assuming that
Assuming-
passes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
assuming it passes. It's going to be put on the warrant. Well, it appears as though it's going to be put on the warrant.
Did they spend the last 500?
Yes.
They spent several $100,000 of it. They partnered with Habitat for Humanity, and I think
It's a property on Main Street.
it's a property on Main Street, and they were turning it from a, they were turning it from a 1-family house into a 2-family. So they did spend several $100,000.
So on this topic, if we give them a number, you can always change it after the warrant comes out, right? You
Right.
can reduce it.
You can reduce it, you can't push it up, but you can reduce it.
Okay.
So, anyway, so that's my report on the Select Board.
Didn't they also say that there are 3 articles that have to come up for a revote? The 17-year-old votes and both the.
Those are, yeah, there are things that could potentially come back. They have to put 6 articles on, and they probably will just take them off or not move them if they don't come back from the legislature. So we have 17-year-old voting, we have the 2 home rule petitions for taxation, for housing, for housing.
Building permit.
Building, there's a building
And the
permit
real
thing.
estate transfer tax.
Yeah.
Right. So those might have to be revoted.
Right. So those 3 things require 2 votes each or something, so it would be 6 articles that they were just going to put on the warrant in the event that they do come back from the legislature between now and town meeting. And if they don't come back, then whatever doesn't come back will just be not moved.
Is it before town meeting, or it's a lot sooner than that, I think? It has to be,
No, they put it on the warrant, they put these things on the warrant assuming that they're going to come back from the legislature.
I see.
If the
And if-
legislature does not move them and bring them back to us to vote,
Yeah.
then they just don't move them at
I
town
get
meeting.
it, got it. And the vote, the legislature's
I thought they
vote
had-
has to be by the end of the calendar year, I think.
Nice.
Is that correct?
No, I
Yeah.
thought it was, we had to vote on it because the state wasn't going to move on it, so we had to somehow renew our commitment to it. So it wasn't that the state comes back and says, yes, we approve this, now you need this, it to be more finely tuned. It was somehow we need to vote it again just to keep it alive.
So each legislative session is 2 years.
That's,
And if these home rule petitions are not acted upon by the legislature within their 2-year session,
Right,
they
go
need to be resubmitted.
That's why we need 2 each. We need one.
That's right,
we
that's
need
right.
We need one,
Yes.
so that in the event that it doesn't come back, we push it forward again. And if it does come back, we have one handy
we
that we
fine-tune
can
it,
that
exactly,
we can finalize.
that's it, You're right, that's it.
So there you go. I didn't catch that while observing the committee, but now that things have snapped into place, it's all good. All right, so school committee, just to be clear with everyone, they are moving one capital warrant article regarding parking at the high school. They are not going to try and work on their ring road. That's good enough, you can drive over it, but they don't want any noise. They just want the focus on their need for parking.
They have come up with a number?
They have a Gale contract. They think it's, what is it, 790K? That's what I have written down here for 125 spaces.
Oh,
Right,
so
is
it's
that
gone up.
about right?
We haven't voted it yet, but yes, that's,
Yeah, I think that's the number.
we're waiting for a little more information to come back.
You're going back to Gale for a little more
Yeah.
detail? So they think,
And then go to the Public Works Department, because Gail last year specified a
Right.
superhighway for the road.
So all I'm gonna say is currently the school committee is working with Gale, not with the town of Concord for this iteration.
Okay, but Gail last year showed that they didn't really understand the project, I thought. They had 5 inches of asphalt, Dick knows this, 5 inches of asphalt for the ring road. That's what you put on 495.
So I'll ask these questions on, we got
Let's
snowed
hope they
out
don't have
last
5
week.
inches of asphalt on the project.
Okay.
okay.
So they're asking for more parking spaces than before.
Well,
It's about the same.
this is the
It's 104 before.
This is the basic parking lot that's kind of attached to the landfill area, leaving most of the landfill area available for other projects.
Did they
Like,
discuss the environmental impact at all of 125 new cars coming in and out every day?
They're very sensitive to that, but they feel as though this is something that is irresistible, that the school committee cannot, and the school administration cannot stop these kids from getting in these cars. And so they're arriving and they're parking all over the neighborhoods.
They're coming close to the school anyway.
Yeah, they're.
These are the kids that in 20 years are going to be accusing us of destroying their planet.
Right.
So, just leave it at
They
that.
already are.
Yeah.
But they built less parking spaces on this
And we are.
campus than they should have in the first place. So they were always short.
This,
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I have a question to Richard? Richard, you were
Yes.
talking about the DPW
Yes.
has some equipment that they need to be refreshed?
It's their trucks, yes.
Right, and I don't see that in the debt authorization plan.
No, it's on
No, it's in the operating
is?
budget.
capital outlay plan.
Okay, it's it'll be paid for with cash? Okay. So is there enough in there?
325,000.
Is there enough in there, do you think? I don't know.
Well, that's what I'm.
That's
what
just
I'm
gonna
That's what you're gonna find out. Okay, never mind, never mind. Yeah,
They talk about their salt shed.
yeah, what about
They've
the
got, they've got a lot of things. They've got gas pumps they need to replace. They've got trucks that need to be replaced. And part of the problem is they have not been, they said
Oh.
they've been inadequately reserving for the trucks. As Carrie might, you might.
Yeah, you might know
Carrie,
this,
they need to change how much they set aside annually for their trucks. I think they were under reserving the replacement. They think they're gonna replace a $50,000 truck, and they go out, and now that truck costs $75,000. So they need to change their reserves a bit.
They have one of the best vehicle and equipment replacement plans of any department in terms of having it documented. And they do submit a request that is higher than what is approved every year, but on a regular annual basis, the town is setting aside at least $350,000 to replace
Great, good to know.
heavy equipment at CPW.
What about the salt shed?
The salt shed is, they're one of the large projects that the town needs to figure out is replacement, enhancement of that campus. That's one of the three main projects. There was some discussion about, piecemealing the projects, and the salt shed was one that was talked about particularly as if that approach goes forward, if it's not, a big, large amount to do everything over there, that the salt shed would be one of the first projects to go forward. But there hasn't been any decision. I think we're waiting to see the middle school, when that is going to get funded, and try to figure out how all of these other projects would fit into some horizon.
I don't want to belabor it, but what's the story with the salt shed?
Oh, it's just that in one of the discussions, that was one that they could take out of the large campus, and that they could actually do something with it this year. I thought that was on the books to do, or in a discussion, I thought that was one of the projects that could be taken out and could be addressed this year because they desperately needed it.
There's no funding set
There's
aside
no
to do
funding.
that
I did
project
hear
in
that
fiscal
too.
'21, but it was discussed as being done in the short term, not in '21.
It was one that could easily be popped out of the queue because it was
Yeah.
relatively modest price and could be done quickly.
And you didn't have to find a big piece of land, just
Yeah,
holds up
exactly.
all the other
A
ones.
lot of
Right.
issues. I have
That's
two-
it, Brian.
I have two other things to bring to your attention. 8:30 on Saturday morning, for those of you who want to get up, there is a town meeting preview meeting held here. I was just informed today that I need to make a presentation of a slide or two of the guideline. And I said, well, we haven't gotten it settled. It'll be settled tonight, so I'll try to put a slide together tomorrow and hand it in. This is what happens when you push the guideline process all the way out into December, which we would try not to do in the future. Also, a reminder that there is a little do that's being held by Carmen Reese at her house on Sunday. So look forward to seeing all of you there. Now, yes, Tom?
I just wanted to ask a question I think is best directed to Mary. Where does Junction Village stand in its cycle of contributions from the town, and what is its status at present?
I think we've allocated everything we meant to allocate. It hasn't gotten the tax credits from the state. The state hasn't awarded its tax credits. It's going back again. And then I think we'll know in November whether they do in fact get the tax credits, and they're hopeful that they will because they're still in communication with the state. So that's looking like that's gonna happen. Now, whether that means our match is enough, that's what I see looming, that,
So November of 20? Well,
yes, next,
wow.
So all the CPC allocations have been made
Yes.
at this
and the
point?
free cash, and the
Well, the
free.
free cash was a done deal, yeah.
Right, and the CPC.
Yep.
Right, so That's all been allocated.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean they won't need more.
What did they say about needing more when they made those representations that
So-
led us to make all these allocations?
I think they
I'm
said
pretty
they
sure they weren't, the promise was they wouldn't come back, yeah.
wouldn't need more.
Oh, really?
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's, you know, the schools did the same thing, and
Before we move on to the finance director's report, can we have a quick discussion about what we might want to recommend to the select board so we can obviate the 12/19 meeting where we might otherwise?
I move.
Can we get a motion?
Move,
Higher.
yes.
Why not, I just want, why not higher? Why not
It's-
3?
Well, because we only have, if we have $11 million, if we give $2 million to that and $500,000 to the housing,
Right.
$1 million to taxes.
$1 million to tax
we're
relief.
getting down into the 7%, 7.5%. So, if we go beyond 2 million, we're getting lower. We want to, still want to have that cushion.
I thought we wanted more than 5. Was that,
Between
5
5
and
and
10.
10%.
Mm.
And
that's a
if you,
big range.
if you move that money from free cash to a stabilization fund, you haven't spent it, it's still part of, it would still be part of that 5 to 10% calculation. It would only be, once it's expended, that it would, it would.
So the bond
technically
rating
lower
agencies-
a reserve.
I see, yeah.
Let me see if I understand that correctly. So the bond rating agencies would still consider that as a reserve, even though it's, whether it's free cash or stabilization, it's, right.
And if we needed to, at town meeting, you could take some of that money and put it towards something else if you needed to do that.
Town meeting could vote to repurpose it.
Yes, okay.
Well, there's also something to be said for precedent, and if $2 million was the number for the last stabilization fund,
For what, for the high school?
The high school.
um,
For the high
But
school,
we
our
had a match though, right?
Yeah, we had a match. We only had a $67 million need, if I recall. And this is looking like no match and 80 to 100.
Right, exactly.
and
Well, you
we
can
can always
keep
add
that.
to this in a give another year. This is just a
Well, the
funded
expectation
initially.
would be that once it's established, we would probably be adding to it and then drawing down eventually, you know, just depending.
Is there some number that you want to get to?
Well, when I wrote my letter to the select board, I went back to look and see how Tony Legavo had managed the situation for the high school debt. They started with a 2 million. The year after that, it was 750,000 deposited. The year after that, another 750 was deposited, but now we start drawing out. So we put a little in, but we drew it out, and then for the next several years, we were drawing out until it was exhausted. And it was mostly just now we're not that, I believe that he had another year or two of advance before the debt would start to hit because the state pays those first dollars in. When you're getting match, they pay the first dollars. Is that correct, Carrie? And then you bond for the rest of the project. So the early construction bills coming in were being paid directly by the state immediately.
Okay.
So we were able to defer our bonding, whereas here we're going to be bonding early in the project. So we don't have the same opportunity to put more away. He put it away for 3 or 4 years in $750,000 chunks. $2 million up front, and then I think 3 years of $750.
So-
It's my recollection off the top of my head.
So for the record, I didn't know that we were giving up on state funding. I thought, you know.
Oh, no, we're applying.
They're still applying.
Yes.
We're applying.
But I think realistically,
They're very pessimistic
They're
on
pessimistic that
our
they'll get
opportunity
it.
of getting it. That's all I can say is the school committee is very pessimistic, so they just feel like we got to just
I
do
just
something.
feel like this is what free cash is for, is to put away money for big projects, and the stabilization fund is the mechanism to do that. So we have a lot of free cash. I mean, we have a very healthy balance, which is the argument that was made last year to use $500,000 for affordable housing. So I would like to use it for the purpose that I thought it was there for, was to defray future tax increases. I mean, free cash is because we
So
raised,
you're arguing for 3 million? What are you arguing
well,
for?
I'll go with 2.5.
We don't get any different, like, interest on it, right?
It's invested. I mean,
Is it different than, would it be different than being in?
Oh, no, it wouldn't be, it would still be subject to the same investment
State requirements.
strategies. It's very, we don't get a lot of interest.
Yes, I'm arguing for,
General fund.
So can you amend Phil's motion, which was at 2? Or did we have a second for Phil's motion?
I still have another question.
Well, we can have discussion.
That's right, we can.
I'd like to amend Phil's motion to increase.
Sorry, but I didn't hear a second.
Oh,
Second,
Okay,
to Phil's motion.
Sure.
okay,
I'm
and Mary
amending
wants
it.
to amend it.
to move it up to 2.5.
I'll second that.
And that would be because we feel we have less time to contribute than we did in the previous example.
Yes,
That argues for a higher amount sooner.
right. That's one reason.
And the other reason is there's more money that we're gonna have to bond than the high school. We had to bond only 67 million for the high school is my recollection, and this will
So we
be
have higher,
bonding the full amount.
we have higher debt service.
So those are two.
Well, let's add to it when we know what the amount is, but there's no reason we can't add to it.
Yeah, because you're saying we can add later. We can.
Sure, we can, yeah.
Yeah,
We
okay.
could add later.
Yeah.
Fine, so then 2.5 is a perfectly good number to
Start.
And
start with.
And it could also be moved at town meeting at a lower number. If our conversation, we could recommend back to them, even though they put 2.5 on the warrant.
Yeah.
We could recommend, gee, you know, we really rethought that. How about 2? We think,
So
just
is
move
There's
2.
not a lot of risk in this. All we're saying is that we want to set aside some money that we've already collected by overcharging property taxes to defray future debt service payments that we think, right? And that's why we have
It's-
free cash,
yeah.
right?
Which means we could start at 2 and just work our way up if we need to, right?
Well, we
I'd
would,
like
we
to
would
just
only be
go
able
for
to
it.
work our way up on an annual basis.
We
Like,
gotta
if
go
started-
through
We can
the-
change it after, if I heard you correctly, we can change this number to 2.5 if we wanted it.
Not, yeah,
No.
wouldn't be
Can't
be
change
able
it
to
up.
change
You
it
can only change
for
half.
this year's town
Okay,
meeting.
now,
It would
okay,
have
I
to be
understand.
another
Thank you.
town meeting.
Thank you.
We'd have to get town meeting approval.
We're not putting shovels in the ground this year, and we probably won't be doing it by next year.
You don't think so?
So is it too early?
It takes a long time. We haven't even, as I understand it, we haven't even hired the,
Yeah, they do.
they just hired the person to do the
Yeah,
design, so.
Peter's not here to give his report, which is
But,
unfortunate.
Well,
Yeah, it is
the process, I mean, I looked at this when we were doing the whole thing. This is just the design phase. It takes like a year or 18 months to do the design phase. So,
Just so you're clear,
I
they
don't
want to be in the school in the 22-23 school year.
Yeah,
They
they're
want to be
moving.
in the school.
They're moving.
Either they're going to move in at the middle of the year.
that's accelerated, but still, it's a year. The building won't be starting until another year at least, right? It's gonna take them a year to do the design, and we'll still have $2 million.
I'd rather just get it now and not have to go back.
I agree. Do we have to do some kind of analysis as to when this would be deployed and how much impact it may have on tax bills or interest payments, or do we need to
And how
do
much
a?
total we
Well,
want
I
in
think-
there?
That's what I want to get to.
How much total, like over 3
Is
years,
it-
we want to build it up to 4.2, I don't know, just throwing a number out
Is
there.
it too early to think about what's the upper limit that we want to have in this stabilization fund? I mean, is there some other stabilization fund we want to have?
They have two different ones. But one reason not to put too much money in is because I don't want to encourage extravagance. Like, we could put $5 million in there, and they say, well, maybe we don't have to, maybe we can have
I don't know
$150
how
million.
there's no relationship between
yeah,
this and
school.
extravagance. This is just to try to mitigate the peak of the,
Right.
of a
I'm not so
debt
sure.
burden.
If somebody,
Phil's point is-
I'd say somebody say, oh, we just got $5 million to build a school. That means we can add another $5 million to the
see what you're
project of the school.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
the whole point of it is, yeah, we can gradually do it, but let's not make it look like we've got all these dollars, because we really don't.
Okay.
It's a good point.
That is-
I think we're overthinking it. Let's go with 2.5 million.
Yeah, okay, I rescind my, I agree with what Phil's saying.
So she's at 2 million.
So you're back at 2 million?
Stay at 2.
It's like ping pong.
I'm sorry.
All right.
This is a funny group. What are we doing?
So the.
Don't you
so
know?
You're withdrawing your amendment?
I am.
Okay.
I agree.
I was supporting your amendment, but anyway.
I know you were. but I agree
All
with,
right,
I
can
agree
we,
with Phil.
this is so that I can write a letter to the select board making a recommendation for a specific number to be placed on the warrant article that they intend to author. So we're currently discussing Phil's motion that that letter should say $2 million for a stabilization fund. Any further?
Yeah, one more question.
Yeah,
If
sure.
we put 2.5 on there, you can go down to 2.
Yes, you
but
can.
If we put 2 on there, you cannot come back up
That's
to
correct.
2.5
You cannot go back up.
This year.
this year, correct? So is it worth it to put the 2.5?
And then if we
If we do a
have
little bit more
second thoughts,
calculations,
if we
right,
do
then-
have second thoughts, we could recommend, please don't move it any further than 2 million, and they would move 2 million instead of 2.5. That's certainly doable.
Well, then town meeting could say, well, it was 2.5 in the warrant, and we're gonna wanna put it up to 2.5. Town meeting can,
Oh, bump it back up to the,
Yeah, they can amend the motion that the select board makes. That's certainly something that can happen.
Are we fully informed of all of the warrant articles that are going to be offered, that involve free cash?
The warrant opens on Saturday.
It opens on Saturday, so we don't
we
know.
don't know yet, yeah.
But the select board, who else
But we do
can,
know of two. We do know of this.
we know of
ours.
this one and the housing authority, right?
Yes.
Yes,
That's
those are the
it.
only ones we- Right. So we do have some, yeah, that's
And how much money actually do we have?
about 10 million.
In free cash,
Yeah,
about $11 million.
11 million.
I thought you said we had 9.5.
That was,
10.
Said 9%. Right.
Oh, okay, we have 11 million.
And then you take the one out that's already there. and you get-
So we're gonna take one out because we're using that to offset, we do that every year. We're gonna take a $500,000 out if the,
we're already out
So we're at
3.5 million.
7.5.
no, we're at 11 million, so we're at 9.5. If we have 11 million in free cash, we're gonna use $1 million to offset next year's taxes. We're down to 10. We use a $500,000 for housing, we're down to 9.5ve million.
And
So
you're
2
two.
million for this.
Now
Oh,
you're
I
down to
see.
7.5.
And you're down
Yeah.
to 7.5.
Sorry.
Yeah. Too many
It's
numbers.
getting late.
Do we have a whiteboard in
let's
here?
leave it at,
We should leave it at 2. We should do what Phil was
Okay,
is
we're-
suggesting.
leave it at 2.
We're at 2?
Leave it at 2.
All right, can I get a vote on this? All in favor of me writing a letter to the select board recommending a $2 million number on the warrant?
For now.
Parashar?
Aye, I was gonna say that, okay.
Well, thank you, Parashar. I think that's unanimous.
Not right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
2.5.
Okay, Greg says no. We have one
One.
one decline. Okay, so now we've found a way to avoid the 12:19
That's
meeting.
good.
Thank you,
I'm
that was
really
good.
glad.
Well,
Really
it's late, it's a late hour, but this is
We
for
got
a
a
good,
lot of work
for a good purpose. And Carrie, do you have a finance report?
I don't have anything.
Okay, good.
The few things I had have already.
Yeah,
been
those were very,
Thank you.
they were very
Thank you.
instructive.
All those
I
reports.
have, so, you didn't do the minutes, right? You not want to do them?
You did one set.
We did, we did.
You did them?
Right away, yeah, we just did those.
I thought we only did one set of minutes, but
There's only one set in there.
doesn't bother me.
No, there were 2 sets in your packet, but you only approved one.
So we need the other, we need to approve another one, right?
That was the other one.
No, this one is in November 7th.
It's not
Oh,
Oh, the hearing.
oh, the hearing, I did, I'm sorry about that. I had not read these, I'm sorry. Would you like to, you want to?
I move that we approve the minutes of the November 7th FinCom hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
I have I do have a.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
on-
discussion.
On page 2, I just wanted clarification on the last bullet where it says, in the middle of the page, the 2019 SGR rate is 2.16, and then when you read the next sentence, it says beginning in FY '20.
Oh, yeah.
FY '20 or FY '21?
By 21.
It should be,
Okay.
Good catch.
Go ahead. We need now to have a vote
As amended?
as amended. All
So
in
I
favor?
move that we, good.
Okay.
motion to adjourn.
Okay, what is that? Yes,
I did go on the website and read it,
yes.
and it was a troubling
It's very troubling. It's troubling.
When are we gonna, or I don't know whether it's this committee or somewhere else, is gonna hear about what happened there?
What,
You know,
what?
What happened when they brought the stuff to the paint shed, right?
Yeah.
That was not a good story, so
No.
I don't know when we're gonna have Stephen come back and talk about it, but I just wanted to put it on our radar.
It's not obvious
Maybe it's not us.
what our job is on
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Maybe it's
But
not
does
us.
everybody know what this is?
No.
Oh, okay, so the town was doing regular maintenance on numerous computers. They had 140 older drives, smaller drives swapped out, and then new drives put in. Those were all, chain of custody was lost on those. Those were to be sent to the data destruction truck over at the swap, thing, and they never arrived at the truck.
They lost.
They just 140 drives, don't know where they are. So the chain of custody was broken and they lost the drives. So they don't know
So,
who walked off with all
I
these
don't know
drives.
who's in charge of internal controls over that stuff. I don't know if it's us.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Anyway,
it's not our,
it's somebody owns it, though.
yeah. I assume that's a select board issue, honestly.
Not FinCom.
Yeah.
And what was the
Definitely not.
Thank God.
Oh, I'm sorry. Motion to adjourn, please?
To adjourn.
All in favor? Okay, good.